Yes, we
Yes.
are. So welcome everyone. Today is May 9th, 2025, and this is the Colorado Produced Water Consortium. Appreciate everyone being here today, and um, I apologize in advance. I got a new puppy yesterday and have had zero sleep, and so I'm doing the best I can here this morning, but I do want to thank everyone for being here today and mostly being willing to continue this journey that we've started almost 2 years ago now. And for me, and I think for a lot of us, it's been quite the journey. I'll start my thoughts today with expression of gratitude first and foremost. I want everyone here to know that I've been involved with countless boards, commissions, task forces, committees, work groups, stakeholder groups over the years, and I could barely remember them all, but I do think about some of those different groups that I've been involved with, and some were successful in the goals that they set out, and some maybe not so successful. They've all had quality people involved with incredible levels of expertise and intelligence. But as I think back to these different groups, the elements that made certain groups successful and maybe others not so much was not the expertise of the people in the room, but rather the willingness of those involved to listen, to try and understand not only the point of view that they brought to the table, but to try and understand the diversity of perspectives that the different members brought to the table and then synthesize that knowledge in developing their own perspectives. Almost 2 years ago now, we began this journey with the quote, "Be curious, not judgmental." And while I don't want to overuse this approach, I want you all to know that in all of my years working with groups like this, I really have never seen a group of individuals with the diversity of backgrounds and level of expertise that we have here embrace this approach the way that you all have. And the results have really been incredible. So I want to thank you for all of that and for all of the work we've done up to this point. But as all of you know, our journey is not done. And in many ways, today is the beginning of a new journey. We spent last meeting talking about what we'll be working on for the next couple of years. And really, we've just embarked on a new journey. And so, with that in mind, I want to bring forward another quote to add to our approach of being curious, not judgmental in the work we're doing. So this quote is by Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is, and I'm sure all of you know this quote, but it is not the destination, but rather the journey that matters. We all have many ideas today on what different destinations we think we want, but my ask to you is that for now we place our focus on the journey, combining that with being curious, and let that guide us to whatever destination it leads to. And so with that, I think we have a really interesting agenda today, and it really starts the next stages of our journey. And so I'll go through quick and talk a little bit about the agenda today. We've got um, Jessica Chavez, who is the new environmental justice liaison for the Front Range for the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, providing an introduction uh, of the work that she's going to be doing. We've got Commissioner Oath from ECMC providing an update uh, to this group on ECMC's produced water emissions work group. Um, we've got Rainey Kumar, who is the OEG Senior GIS Analyst from the Colorado Department of Public and Health and Environment, providing us some perspective on environmental justice mapping tools. We've got Kevin Chan, consortium member representing disproportionately impacted communities, providing us some perspective on engaging communities to identify produced water solutions. We've got Commissioner Pinter from Adams County, consortium member, and Katie Keefe, who's the environmental programs manager from Adams County, providing perspective on local government considerations when citing centralized produced water storage and treatment. And then we have Rick McCurdy, Consortium member and Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability at Select Water Solutions, providing us some perspective on technical considerations when building centralized storage and treatment facilities. And then Assistant Director for Research, Dr. Aaron Sidlako, is going to provide a second draft of Deliverable 9, which is identifying toxicological and analytical methods. And so, full agenda today. And with that, I think it's important that the primary focus of today's agenda is education. Really, the goal here is to create a baseline of understanding for upcoming discussions. And so today is not a day that we'll be debating or posturing or discussing, but rather it's an opportunity to hear and learn from different folks and gain knowledge and different perspectives. We will at future meetings in July and August, and Director Dalton will go into this further, have opportunities for discussion and debate. But today is all about being curious. It's all about being on the journey, and it's all about learning. And so I ask you to kind of open yourself to that concept as we hear different perspectives today. And so with that, thanks again for being here. I'm looking forward to what we're going to learn today. And excited to have you all here today. So thanks again. And with that, I will hand it over to Director Dalton for some updates.
Thank you, Chair Messner. And I think we're mispronouncing Ronnie's name. Anyway, I'm sure I mispronounced it again, and apologies for that. So I have several announcements. It might take the whole 10 minutes, so apologies to all the members and the public. Many members of the public attended an energy symposium hosted by Garfield County in Rifle a couple weeks ago, and I was a panelist and had a great time there, met a lot of nice people, and had some positive feedback on our work at the consortium. I would like to now invite consortium members who attended the Energy Symposium in Rifle to share their experiences.
I hope this is Eric England. I did have the opportunity to also attend that event. Our company is a sponsor for that event, and as you had the opportunity, I also had the opportunity to meet with both regulators and other operators, and also to share some of the successes and the progress with the Produced Water Consortium and the rulemaking process. And I felt it was well received. I think it was a good opportunity to continue to inform the greater public about the work that this body is doing, and to collaborate together on best steps next to try to meet the recycled targets that have been set.
Hello, Carmia Woolley with the BLM. I also attended, and Hope, thank you so much for spearheading the panel on produced water. I definitely appreciated all the insight and how the discussion really represented the different views and abilities across Colorado. And then I also thought it was a great opportunity for networking, especially in preparation for our next in-person meeting, getting all the logistics hammered out so we can have a really efficient and effective meeting in person. So thank you.
Yeah, good morning. This is Jeff Kirtland with the Peons representatives out there, and thank you to everybody that did come out to the west side of the state. Not much to add to what Carmia and Eric have already said, other than this is a really great event where it brings a lot of diverse perspectives, a lot of local government participation. And I think that's really critical, and it's very much in line with the mission of this group to have a diverse number of voices in these discussions. So I thought that was and continues to be a really good event. I'm sure Garfield County would love to have more folks come out and participate in that. I think it's one of the top events to really discuss oil and gas issues at a local government level. And Hope and Eric and the panel, provided really good information about produced water and the goal of this consortium. So thanks for the work there.
Okay, I think we captured most everyone. Chair Messner was also there. Do you want to say anything, Chair? Okay, so the next event that we went to, well, I went to, and at least two other consortium members went to, is the Harvest of All First Nations community event in Boulder. And this community event really was a learning opportunity for the community, and it was kind of cool. It was held on a farm in Boulder County, and we got asked a lot of good questions from the community. John or Harmony, would you like to speak on that event?
It was definitely an interesting event that was attended by a lot of everyday residents, people who are very passionate about the environment, and Indigenous people who have a very different philosophy about ecosystems connecting to the earth than a lot of the folks when we sit in traditional government and industry spaces. And when you start to explain the concept of produced water and fracking and their feedback, it's very different than the room that we are in right now today. And that a lot of people do not want these activities happening in their backyard or possibly at all, and want us to move to different systems that are much more respective of our water and of our planet and of the people on it. But it was a great opportunity, and community groundwork level engagement is really hard. And I appreciate Hope and Commissioner Messner for coming to this space, and we need more of this.
Yeah, Hope, thanks. And thanks, Harmony. I thought it was a great event. I really appreciate the community being willing to invite us and listen, as well as ask some really great questions in their attempt to better understand not only what's happening in their space, but what's happening on a broader perspective, and trying to understand how they can be involved and be better heard in the different processes in state government. And so I thought it was a good event. So appreciate being invited.
Thank you both. And Emma, would you be able to show the one pager? So I was asked by Harvest of All First Nations to bring like a one-page document, and I believe several consortium members have also asked me to make a one-page document. I finally made it. It's on our website. It tells a little bit about the consortium, our goals, our strategic priorities, and how we did over the past 18 months and what we're looking forward to in the next 18 months. Thank you, Emma. Now I'd like to pass it over to Rick McCurdy, who has an update on a pilot project. Rick?
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody and looking forward to our in-person meeting next month. We've got a couple of pilot projects in works now. One is currently just finished up through phase one down in the Permian Basin, just outside of Midland, in which we were piloting a thermal desalination process to recover distilled water out of produced water. And we've successfully done that, and we've pulled off approximately 2,000 barrels of a very clean distillate. We've had it analyzed. The Texas Consortium and the New Mexico Consortium have both sampled it and sent split samples off to Eurofins for third-party analysis. We're starting to get that initial data back, showing that we initially, through all the distillation, we removed everything out of the water, out of all the 400 some constituents. We got them all below detection where we needed to be. And the last two things, which we knew this would happen, is you see ammonia and you see methanol carry over with the steam. So we're in the process now. We've polished all the ammonium out of the distilled water, and now we're in the process of consuming the methanol out of it. Once we've done that, this summer we will be doing the Texas Tech and the Texas Consortium will be doing a two-phase irrigation study. We've got a signed letter of authorization from the Texas Railroad Commission. We're going to do a 6/10 of an acre tract adjacent to the recycle facility where we did the pilot. And we're going to be irrigating 5 different crops with 4 different sources of water, one being just natural precipitation and one being the distilled produced water, monitoring plant growth. And at the end of the growing season, Texas Tech's going to come in and take plant samples and go do forensics on all the plant cell structure and all that to get. Ultimately, there's going to be a very nice report put out of this. Now, closer to home in Colorado, this has been a long time. I don't know what's taken so long. Nothing to do with the state. It just has to do with internal focus between Select and our customer. But the facility that many of y'all visited, I believe, last year, our Lone Star facility, this disposal and recycle facility, we will be doing a seawater RO pilot there, hopefully sometime later this summer, in which we plan to recover a fresh permeate out of that produced water there. And there's going to be ultimately some additional testing and work done with that through Colorado State University. So as we move further along in this path and we get more data, and maybe sometime later this year, if we have the opportunity for an in-person and we are running that seawater RO pilot, we'll bring everybody out, invite everybody out there again if they want to come out and do it. Does that cover everything you wanted, Hope?
Oh, I thought it was great. Thank you, Rick. I believe we have a question from Jolly.
I will keep it really short because I know our agenda is packed. Rick, that's amazing work. I just had some follow-up questions and would love to chat with you about the work and learn more. Some gaps in pilot projects in Pennsylvania led to some huge issues with discharge in their riverbeds, and I have some resources I would love to share with you about the gaps in their research, just to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel with the same gaps. Thank you for doing the work you're doing. I'd love to chat with you more about it.
Absolutely, Joey, and I'd love to talk with you about it. Back during my Chesapeake days, very active up in Pennsylvania and very aware of some of the stuff you're talking about.
Sorry, Barbara.
Quick question, Rick, and we can follow up offline if you'd like. I'm curious where you are with the applications for discharge into the Pecos in Texas.
So we are, to be transparent with the group, we are in the process of submitting 3 different potential discharge applications. One of them is, as Barbara mentioned, will be for the Pecos River. It'll go into a Salt Creek, eventually go into Salt Creek and then flow into the Pecos River just downstream of the Red Bluff Reservoir. Now, one thing I'd like to point out, we have no intentions at this point in time yet to actually treat and discharge water there. But as the application and the permit process for what's referred to as a PET fees permit is a minimum 330 days, we wanted to go ahead and get the data in and get the information in to we got a couple more I's to dot and T's to cross, and then we'll be submitting those applications to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality.
Thank you, Rick. Clay?
Good morning, Clay Terry here. Rick, just a quick question on your Permian pilot program with thermal distillation. Does your work has that included a total cost analysis of the treatment train system?
Yeah, we're in the process of doing that now, Terry. And this was a system that was originally designed to produce 400 barrels of distillate a day. Because we realized going through the process that a couple of pieces on the distillate recovery side had been undersized. The max we were able to hit was 370 barrels a day, but even at that, using a cost of $4 per million BTU for gas, we're coming in at about $1 a barrel. For energy consumption, that's not capital recovery and all that. So that will have to be factored into a much larger system. But at least from a energy consumption standpoint, we were pretty confident that that was a good number.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Messner, we've had a request by Jessica to go now. Do you have any concerns with that?
No, I know she's got a hard stop at 9:30, so it'd be great to hear from her now.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Messner and Director Hope. I'm really excited to be here and introduce myself. My name is Jessica Chavez. I'm one of the two new environmental justice liaisons. I'm in the Front Range, and my counterpart, Steve Arauza, who's working on the Western Slope. A little bit about the work that I'm doing. I think it's split up into, actually, it's mostly all kind of how community outreach and engagement is done. One with operators through their community outreach plans that they're now required to comply with if they trigger certain distance parts. And then two, how community outreach is embedded in ECMC and how we continue to build those relationships within community. So I'm really excited to be a part of the work. We've already had 2 open houses, just kind of introducing ourselves to community, or specifically ENGOs that were a part of the cumulative impacts rulemaking, and just kind of getting an idea of how we're going to start doing our community outreach plan and just start implementing. So I'm really excited about that. And we started getting community outreach plans from industry operators, just showing their involvement and how they're going to build that transparent communication and building trust with community. So I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, I think that's a little update about myself. I appreciate it.
Well, we certainly appreciate you coming to our meeting. Thank you, Jessica, and thank you for fitting us in. I really appreciate it. So
Yes.
Next, we'll go back to the updates. Harmony Cummings has a invitation for the group.
Hi, everybody. Our organization is partnering with lots of groups in Denver, including Denver Parks and Rec, Denver Water, and 30 other organizations to activate and alchemize a very polluted area in Globeville, one of the most polluted areas in the country, that's currently asphalt parking lot touching the railroad, the polluted Platte River, and a ton of industry. And the neighborhood has been pushing for years to turn this into a park. And so we are bringing people to the space to get true ground level community input of their wants and needs, to be sure that we're actually hearing the people, and actually talking about meaningful community benefits, which is very different than corporate responsibility and accountability. One of the things that people are really concerned with in the area is contamination of their soil. So we are partnering with CDPHE to provide free lead soil testing. So it's going to be a beautiful event, a climbing wall for the kids, a DJ, art projects. We're giving away plants, and would love for you to share with your networks or come out and join us and really look at these types of things when we talk about community engagement and how we can be having these conversations at the ground level in approachable ways that's fun and, a little bit untraditional than our normal government and industry spaces. And I'll share some links in the chat. And just a little note that the soil, we have a little misprint or missaid, and it needs to be dug 6 to 8 inches down to make sure we get that generational legacy pollution, and we're testing there. So thank you for letting me share that update.
Sounds like a great event, Harmony. So next, many consortium members have been asking about the forms development. So the ECMC, our Energy and Carbon Management Commission, held a produced water rulemaking. These rules require a different level of data collection, which means the forms for which the operators report that data will be changing. So I've invited ECMC to present on how they're going to implement that to our, they'll be presenting at our June meeting. So next, I'd like, Emma, if you can put up the notes from our strategic planning meeting, that'd be great. So at our strategic planning meeting, which was in April, we identified several, and Emma, can you scroll down so we can see the bottom right corner? We identified several priorities for working in the next 18 months. These are, identified in this bottom right corner, and this is on our website. And at the bottom, our first priority is this discussion of the prohibition of centralized produced water storage and treatment in DI communities or disproportionately impacted communities. And this restriction creates a potential barrier to the increased reuse and recycling of produced water. We'll be talking about that over the next 4 meetings. That's our first priority for the next 18 months. Alongside working at the exact same pace is our data transparency, verification, functionality, and tracking, or as listed on these notes, the data priority. So we'll be working on those 2 priorities primarily in the next 2 to 4 months. Those priorities touch other priorities, but our third one was challenges and opportunities. And this is really related to the review of the produced water rules that we annually will review these produced water rules. It'll be 1 year that the produced water rules have been in effect in April of 2026. The 4th priority is basin-specific recommendations. The 5th priority is proactive outreach and engagement. And then alongside all of these 5 priorities is research and funding. And that's why on the notes it has a star. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of the outcome of April's meeting. And I will be developing more of a strategic timeline with deliverables and due dates associated with this. So we're done with that, Emma. And I wanted to let you know that today is officially Emma's last day. And we thank you, Emma, for your service. We do, yes, you can unmute yourself and let's give her a little round of applause.
Thank you.
And we do have new staff. Jermaine, were you able to get your sound working? I'm going to guess she did not. So we have hired Jermaine Mira, and Jermaine Mira comes to us from public safety. And interesting fun fact is she replaced me when I left public safety to come to the consortium. So I believe Jermaine is going to be a fantastic addition to our staff. You will meet her at our June meeting. Jermaine's main task right now is working on reimbursement requests and stipends. So you will be receiving emails from Jermaine. We are trying to get all of those processed as quickly as possible so that we know how much budget the consortium has. So if you've been behind, I have definitely been behind in responding to those. So Jermaine's going to help us with that. And I wanted to give you a preview of upcoming meetings. And this is in our updated agenda So if you want to review them, you can. So today we're learning about this barrier of the prohibition of centralized produced water treatment and storage in DI communities. And we're really focusing on an Eastern Colorado perspective. We are also working on the data piece, which is that second draft of deliverable 9 on analytical and toxicological methods. At our June meeting, we're essentially doing the same thing from a Western Colorado perspective, and we'll hear from ECMC on how they plan to implement some of the revisions in the produced water rules for their data collection. And we'll be finalizing that deliverable 9. So we'll make sure that everybody's voices are captured so that we can submit the report on July 1st. At our August meeting and our July and August meetings, I am thinking about a little bit of a change. I've heard from consortium members, and so this is not final at all, but I've heard that we could use these meetings as working meetings. And so I was considering having each of us really work on developing an approach to the recommendations that we're preparing for ECMC on the DI communities topic as a barrier, and use July and August to do that and submit those recommendations to ECMC on September 1st. Now, backing up to June, if you need a hotel room, I believe we have about 15 people that have said they need hotel rooms for our June meeting. If you need a hotel room purchased by the consortium, it's the end of our fiscal year, so that's why we'd like to purchase them instead of do the reimbursements. It just makes the paperwork much faster. Please contact me as soon as possible stating you need a hotel room. And that's the end of my announcements. Irene?
Yes, thank you, Irene Andrus. On the ECMC showing the form revisions, is that going to be that we'll be seeing a draft of them, or is that going to be that they're completed?
I have no idea, but we have invited ECMC staff to give us an update on where they are.
Okay. It would be good if we can do any suggestions and have them incorporated at that point in time. Thank you.
I do hear you, and that is part of our data transparency, verification, functionality, and tracking priority. And so you're not alone in requesting that, and we'll see how it progresses. Unfortunately, I don't have a timeline for you right now. Okay. Well, I think that's all of the questions. Back to you, Chair Messner.
Thank you, Director Dalton. Thank you, everyone, for providing all that information. That was great. So next on the agenda is public comment. And so I think we have one public commenter. So would open the floor to that person for 3 minutes.
We had a public comment from Angelique Rodriguez, but it does not look like she is here today.
Okay. Thank you for that. If she ends up showing up, we can make arrangements perhaps later in the meeting to have her provide her perspective. So with that, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is an update from Commissioner Oath on ECMC Produced Water Emissions Work Group. So welcome, Commissioner Oath.
Thank you, Chair Messner, and thank you to all of you. I really appreciate you carving out a few minutes for me on your agenda. I can see how very packed it is, and really appreciate all of the hard work that you are doing. I just wanted to come in, provide a quick update on the Produced Water Emissions Work Group, backing up just a bit, as you all are the most familiar with the legislative directive in statute for the commission to, increase the use of recycled or reused produced water, but doing so without increasing emissions. And so, as was noted earlier, in response to and based on the very hard work of this consortium, the commission did hold a rulemaking hearing earlier this year on the topic of increasing the targets of recycled and reused produced water, but did kind of carve out this question of, and what I see as a very technical question of how do we measure, collect, and report data on air emissions to make sure that these increase in the use of water is being done without increasing air emissions. And so that was carved out with the intention that a work group process convene to kind of work through some of the technical challenges of that issue. So that work group is just about to get started. The first meeting is going to be later this month. We're going to keep those discussions focused on, what are the methods to measure, track, and report air emissions data. And I also really want to note, both in recognition of the vast amounts of expertise on produced water that the members of this consortium have, and also with really acknowledging how important it is for the work and the discussions of this consortium and the discussions of the emissions work group to stay coordinated and informed of each other. For both of those reasons, we've asked this consortium's director, Hope Dalton, to participate in the work group discussions on behalf of the consortium. And I'm just super grateful to have that participation. We do also have representatives from disproportionately impacted communities, both in the DJ Basin and on the West Slope, who have agreed to participate. We have representatives from local government, again, both in the DJ and on the Western Slope, who have agreed to participate, as well as operators in both areas. And then on top of that, we also have representatives, certainly from the ECMC staff, as well as the Department of Public Health and Environment's Air Pollution Control Division participating. So feel very grateful that we have a pretty broad amount of perspectives, but with kind of a focus on folks with very technical backgrounds on air data to come together and work through these issues. Look forward to staying coordinated, through your director, and we'll figure out how to provide updates and share information across the groups as we go through the process. And that's all I have. Thanks again so much for these couple of minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Oath, and really appreciate the work that you're doing and willingness to coordinate. And so certainly, and thanks, Director Dalton, for being willing to participate on that, representing the consortium. So thanks for the update.
Thank you.
With that, next item on the agenda is me. So addressing barriers to centralized produced water storage and treatment. And so just to set the stage, and I talked about it a little bit in my introduction, but this is going to be a multi-part discussion. And so, the different barriers were identified in some of the deliverables we've done over the last year and a half. And one of those barriers that was identified was the prohibition of centralized produced water treatment facilities in disproportionately impacted communities. Understanding that it was identified as part of our reports, and then acknowledging that we were asked by the Energy and Carbon Management Commission during the produced water rulemaking to look at that to see if there were opportunities to remove or minimize some of that barriers to centralized produced water storage and treatment in disproportionately impacted communities. But in that process, really understanding what the concerns were, what the operations were, and seeing if there was any opportunities for solutions. And as part of that multi-step process, and it's really the way we've handled all of our deliverables up to this point, is taking some time to really understanding the topic and hearing different perspectives on the topic before we dive right into debate or discussion on the topic. And so, as I indicated, and as Director Dalton indicated in her comments, we've got the kind of learning or education piece broken down into two different meetings. This meeting is going to be Eastern Colorado focused on different perspectives on this barrier. And then June meeting is Western Colorado perspective, including, I think, a site visit to a centralized produced water treatment facility if that ends up working out. And then July and August furthering those discussions as once we have a kind of a better baseline of understanding on the topic and different perspectives on the topic. And so today, we've got a number of speakers that are going to provide some perspectives on Eastern Colorado, and the first person who is up is the Senior GIS Analysis from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, providing a perspective on the environmental justice mapping tools that were developed to identify disproportionately impacted communities and how those are identified, and really appreciate, and I'm going to butcher your name one last time and then you can correct me, but Rainey Kumar being here today and providing her perspective to us.
Thanks, John. You got part of it. It's Ronnie. Nice to be with everyone. Like John just introduced, I am the GIS analyst for the Office of Environmental Justice here at the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And I think I have about 30 minutes to talk you all through the statutory definition of disproportionately impacted communities. So I see a lot of familiar faces on the call. So for some folks, this will be retreading maybe what they already know. But for folks who are sort of new to the formal definition of disproportionately impacted community, this is a legislative definition that comes out of House Bill 21-1266, also known as the Environmental Justice Act, but then had an update in 2023. And our office at the Department of Public Health and Environment displays this map for statewide use. But again, this is a legislative definition that we are displaying. So when you're formally talking about disproportionately impacted communities, we're going back to that statutory definition from these bills. Tessa Sorensen is also here on the call with me. She's a close colleague. So when we get to some more of the conversation parts, really my role today is to explain the definition to you all and then sort of leave it up to you all to discuss how that applies or does not apply to your work. So I'm going to start with a slideshow. And I'm going to turn off my camera. If I freeze, Tessa, just flag. My internet doesn't love Zoom sometimes.
Will do.
So thank you. So there are two maps that we run out of our office here, the disproportionately impacted community map and Colorado EnviroScreen 2.0. Today, I'm going to focus primarily on the disproportionately impacted community map and touch on Colorado EnviroScreen 2.0 and how that feeds into the definition as one criteria. But again, I think primarily for your all's work, it is that statutory definition that we're interested in. So this is the map that we manage and that I'll do a demonstration of provides an overview of all of the areas that meet the statutory criteria of disproportionately impacted communities. There are, I think, a total of 9 criteria, 8 that are mapped, and they include all registered mobile home communities in the state, census block groups that are above 40% low income, above 40% people of color, above 50% housing cost burden, above 20% linguistically isolated. Additionally, we have what we call the cumulative impact prongs, so areas that have a high cumulative burden score, which we measure through Colorado EnviroScreen. There's a prong for the Justice 40, which was a former Biden White House administration term disadvantaged communities that they used under Justice 40. And then all areas under tribal jurisdiction in Colorado are also within that disproportionately impacted community definition. So that's the map I'm going to be walking you through today. And again, this is coming from Colorado Revised Statute 24-4109 and that specific definition. In addition, if you are particularly interested in sort of that cumulative burden score, which we call the Colorado EnviroScreen score, we have this standalone tool which allows you to deep dive into 35 different environmental and public health data sets that we use to calculate that cumulative burden score. So I'll show a little bit of how to use that. But again, primarily for your work, you're thinking about this statutory definition. Quick plug for our Office of Environmental Justice. We have a missing photo here, but we did just have our director come in, Megan Guevara, but this is our EJ office, and we do a lot of work across the state. So I'm happy to connect you with folks who are on this call for other types of environmental justice work. I'm, the mapping person, but there's folks who work specifically on mobile home water quality, our grants program, supplemental environmental projects, as well as our environmental justice board. I think I saw some EJ board members on this call as well. So when we're talking about environmental justice mapping here in Colorado, I mentioned this already, but it goes back specifically to the Environmental Justice Act, House Bill 21-1266, which set out a specific definition for disproportionately impacted communities. So when state bodies like yours, or for example, work that happens in the regulatory sphere of our agency, use this specific term, it's referring back to the statutory definition. There was an update to this definition in 2023, and the relevance for you all is that it's standardized this definition of disproportionately impacted communities across all state agencies in Colorado. So when we use this term, it's the term, if it's being formally used in a rulemaking or for like a grant program, the DI communities apply for, CDOT, to Department of Natural Resources, to the Colorado Energy Office, to ECMC work, and obviously the work that you all are doing. And so that's why we at CDPHE are pulled in. We map this definition based on the criteria, but it is uniform for users across the state. So like I said, the statutory definition contains these different buckets. The first one is purely demographic criteria, and the definition sets very specific thresholds for census block groups, which are a measure of population density across the state that the Census Bureau uses. And so I'm not going to repeat them all, but we have the demographic criteria bucket. So any place in Colorado that meets that above 40%, et cetera, criteria is considered disproportionately impacted. For the cumulative impacts criteria, we have if they have a high EnviroScreen score, or if they met the former climate and economic justice screening tool, disadvantage, also known as Justice 40 criteria. And then, like I said, all areas under tribal jurisdiction and all registered mobile home parks in Colorado meet the definition. Very briefly, when we talk about that EnviroScreen score, the cumulative score, areas with the high score, we're looking for cumulative effects, so burden, environmental burden, and population characteristics. There are 35 data indicators that go into how we calculate that score. So this data is available for you all to pull across the state and sort of understand environmental health and sociodemographic climate, as well as climate concerns for those areas that you're working in across the state. But this is just one metric of that DI community score. So essentially areas that have high burden across multiple criteria end up with higher EnviroScreen scores, and the highest EnviroScreen scores are counted as DI communities. This is just an update. We released updates to the tools in November of 2024. So we now have the most recently available version of the disproportionately impacted community data is from November 2024, as well as our new version of Colorado EnviroScreen 2.0 was released in November. So if you were really familiar with the first version of Colorado EnviroScreen and the May 2023 disproportionately impacted community definition, there have been updates that we released in November. And I won't go through all of this, but if you're particularly interested in our data process for that cumulative score, we worked really closely with Colorado State University as well as the Colorado School of Public Health on updating those tools and sort of beta testing and producing the highest quality tools we can for the state. So, takeaways for you today. The disproportionately impacted community map displays the latest data requirement areas for that statutory definition. The most up-to-date version is the DI communities of November 2024. The other tool, Colorado EnviroScreen 2.0, lets you deep dive into these different environmental health data sets, and you can see how we calculate that EnviroScreen score. So I'm going to do a brief tool demonstration, show you how to pull reports from the DI community tool, and then open it up for questions and conversation. So the tool is available in English and Spanish. I can put these links in the chat afterwards. My slides are attached to the meeting, I think now. But this landing page for the disproportionately impacted community goes over again what I just said. What is the statutory definition? What are the exact criteria? You can download the data if you wanted to pull things into your own maps. And you can also see exactly what our data sources are for each criteria. We have more overview FAQs, and then if I go really fast today, you can watch our how-to videos or read our user guides for how to use the tool. To launch the tool itself, you go to this large green button, and it will open up the map. And so the intention of this map is to be very simple and user-friendly. It is only showing the DI criteria as mandated and pulling the data that we produced from November 2024. You're able, if you want, to click on and off different criteria. So for example, there are some of our air regulations here at CDPHE that do not use this Justice 40 criteria. So they can turn that part off, or there's areas where, our air division does not have regulatory authority in tribal jurisdiction areas, so you can turn off those layers as well. The mobile home communities are the black dots across the state. And when you go, so I'm going to use, you can, zoom in with these buttons, or I'm using my mouse to scroll in. You can go to an area, and since I know we're talking about Eastern Colorado, I'm going to come over here towards Rocky Ford, and I'm going to pick on this census block group. But when I click on an area, this pop-up shows exactly how it meets the statutory definition. So in this case, this highlighted area meets the low income, people of color, and it was identified as part of a Justice 40 census tract. So you can do that across the state for the different criteria. Additionally, if you have a specific address or place in mind, or like lat long for a project, latitude, longitude, you can type that in. I'm going to actually just use this same block group that I just clicked on. I do have an example up, but I realized it's from the Western Slope. So bear with me, it can take a little bit for it to run when I have a lot of things on my computer. So, well, hopefully that pops up, but it pops up with a link to download, a hyperlink to download the report, and that report will open. So I'm going to just show you what that looks like, but this is a Western Slope example. This is not the census block group I just clicked on, but it does include a table that shows all of the criteria for the DI definition, and if it is meeting it, yes or no, for this current data version. And so let's see what that looks like. So that would look for the one I just ran, it pulls up this report here, and you can see, yes, this area does meet the DI community definition. So I might pause there. I can show you there are similar capabilities on EnviroScreen 2.0. EnviroScreen has its own homepage, let's see, that you can go to that has a lot of the resources, our technical documentation for that cumulative score, which is one of the criteria in the DI definition. You're able to download that data and play around. So again, this is a little outside the scope of what you all are doing, because it doesn't sound like you're going to need to pull the underlying environmental health data necessarily for the cumulative scores, but you're able to run reports, make maps, filter, do deeper analyses through EnviroScreen. So I can show you all that as well. But when you run an EnviroScreen report, you end up with, so this is a report I ran earlier, same exact process as on the DI map. You go to report, you click the location that you are interested in, And this report will pull all the environmental health data for that location. And it pulls the indicators that we use, the raw value, the unit, and then a percentile ranking. So from 0 to 100, it's scoring closer to 100, indicates higher burden compared to the rest of the state. And so you have all of that input data. And then also at the end of that report, we include this DI community information. So there's two ways to sort of get to that data. This is the more in-depth, pull all of your environmental health data. This map is more applicable directly to the work you all are doing, if it's in a DI community or not. So I will stop there and happy to answer questions, and we'll also tee up Tessa to support as well.
Thanks, Ronnie. Really appreciate the information and the overview of kind of how the whole disproportionately impacted community criteria works. So thanks for that. Consortium members, is there any questions on the information that's provided? Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Messner and Ronnie. Thank you so much for the presentation. Jeff Kirtland with Terra Energy Partners, TEP Rocky Mountain. And I really appreciate the overview of the update that has taken place. I'm curious, just from an understanding, what sort of precipitates an update from the 1.0 to the 2.0, and as that information is updated, what is the process, or is there plans to continually update? And I guess that relates to data that comes from census blocks, obviously, but I'm just curious about how that process really takes place in this process.
Yeah, it's a really important question, especially in when talking about I'm thinking more like the permitting sphere. We work really closely with our air division and also with the ECMC. So the update process for the DI definition itself is fairly simple in the sense that it is just a data refresh. So I showed this earlier, and actually let me go back. So this page here, the data that we use that's required by that statutory definition. So there's a very specific wording in that text that we need to use 5-year Census Bureau data sets for the population demographic parts of the definition. So we're just pulling the 5-year estimates from what's called the American Community Survey. And then for the EnviroScreen score, obviously that's a much bigger update because that's a more, looking at how are we updating 35 data sets, the methodologies that we're doing for that, et cetera. So that's a bigger lift. Mobile home parks are coming straight from the DOLA registration program, and then areas under tribal jurisdiction are flagged based on block groups from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So with that, what we've done in the last 2 years, so there was a version of this data released in May 2023, and then with the update in November 2024, there are parts of the map that changed. There are a lot of reasons for the different changes that happen. Some have to do with census boundary shifts. So I can share this document's on the homepage, but it summarizes what that means. And we go through in depth, what does it look like when it changes, et cetera. So all just to underline that changing or updating the data is a huge process, and it has a lot of downstream effects. So we're very aware of that. And we are, especially in the regulatory sphere, increasingly recognize the need to stay stable and clear and consistent. So when we do our future update, we're aiming have a proposed update of November 2028 right now. Partly that's because of just how long the permitting processes take, and if we're changing these maps between then, it's really hard to incorporate by reference. And then for the full EnviroScreen update, there's a lot of technical work. I'm trying to go back to there's a lot of technical work that goes into how we calculate that burden score. And so that takes a lot of time and effort and community engagement, and is a slow and transparent process. So I would be interested, for the purposes of your all's work, just, I think it's important to understand that cadence, and Tessa can get into like how incorporation by reference and being really specific about which data you're pointing to. So for example, wanted to make very clear that right now the most current version is November 2024. And so possibly needing to include very precise language in whatever work you do of what you're pointing to, because it will be updated in a few years.
Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very helpful tool that I'm just seeing for the first time. Um, but I guess how did you mention that some of this data is actually gathered from census data?
So the demographic data is all directly from the Census Bureau. Yeah, it's
Okay.
American Community Survey 5-year census data.
Yeah, I also understand that with general census data, at least from my family and other families that I've talked to in the past, some of them don't even take the survey. So I know that sometimes things may be miscounted or just undercounted. And I know that that's kind of like a kind of a statistic that we normally take in when we do this. I think it just absolutely harps on, the need for that outreach that these, everybody takes the census. And it is just to give much more accurate data. Just from, talking to friends and family and stuff like that, it's kind of hard.
Yeah, things like that. It is, we have to use the best data we have available, which are these census data, but
Yeah.
Tessa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll add to the response to that. It's some of the data comes from census data, right? A lot of the demographics too, the environmental scores, of course, and some of the health and scores, and some of those come from different sources as well. So there's a really big mix that goes into that. But census block is definitely a very big part of how we look at the demographics there for sure. And yes, it's all we can do is work with the best data we have. So yeah, that's a very, very important flag. You're right.
Jolie?
I love the point, Kevin, and just want to flag as well. When we were redistricting the state for the State Redistricting Commission, we had some gaps in census data. And so we actually leaned on a lot of support from the state demographer's office because they had some more data that filled in some of the gaps. So I would just love to offer that advice. It was really helpful. And then when we got the full data from the federal census, because of the COVID delays, the state demographer's data was so spot on, like it was really great. And so I just wanted to kind of speak to that a little bit as an extra data source you could be pulling from.
Yeah,
Awesome,
absolutely.
thanks.
We work closely with the state demography office. So I've definitely, before she retired, spent a lot of time talking to Elizabeth, the state demographer. I will say that the data that we are working with in the sort of, especially for the DI definition, is legislatively mandated. So to your point, there are other ways of looking at this data, and there are a lot of data nuances. So I think it's really good to consider what I call like the data universe, and to supplement with like on the ground outreach and sort of taking multiple looks at how you're defining communities. I think the strength of the disproportionately impacted community definition itself is that it is standardized and provides a framework, and then lets people have these questions and sort of work off of it and like, does this make sense? So I would say I would never say that this is the only way to consider disproportionately impacted communities, but it is the statutory way to consider disproportionately impacted communities.
Well, thanks, Ronnie. Really appreciate you being here and providing that information. Super helpful in developing a baseline for this group, and just appreciate your time. So thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. And happy to answer any questions. I know a lot of folks on this call use this data in a lot of ways. Tessa and I work closely together, so communicate to me directly, or Tessa can answer a lot of the questions too.
Great. Thank you. So with that, next up on the agenda is Kevin Chan, consortium member representing disproportionately impacted communities. And he's going to share a perspective on engaging communities to identify produced water solution. So the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm not gonna read my title, but can next slide. Just some personal background about myself. My family came from Vietnam during the Vietnam War. They were literally the boat people that, we hear and see and, fresh off the boat, like the TV show kind of made out of it. So living with, immigrant parents and, didn't speak very much, English very well. I kind of lived this experience where we came to the community, to the States, just knowing very little and just building and trying to understand and gain our bearing in this huge melting pot or salad bowl, if you want to call it. There's very many terms that we've kind of come across, but I also want to mention that, as I was growing up, we had to have a lot of assistance from the government. I lived in, subsidized housing, things like that. And, talking to various people and kids and, growing up, it was a very interesting experience. Knowing that, my family was given so much, I did decide to join the Marine Corps after 9/11 to serve. One of my first kind of big missions was a humanitarian effort to Sri Lanka in 2004. After I believe it was like 200,000 people were impacted or died because of the tsunami. So loading lots of water and food just to deliver aid during that time. I also served in Afghanistan for Operation Enduring Freedom in 2010. And then once I got out, I utilized my GI Bill to get a computer science degree. During my time there, I started a nonprofit or kind of a group to teach students in Oakland and San Leandro how to just computational thinking and just really trying to expand how to break down problems into subsets. Then after that, I moved, once I got my degree, I moved to Colorado, started a nonprofit called Save the Aurora Reservoir. You may have heard of it. Now I volunteer some of my time as a Metropolitan District Director, just really trying to advocate for various things like for the community with that mindset of community first. Next slide. So when we talked about oil and gas operations, and then this kind of led to the Produced Water Consortium, what I think that there in the community there's a lot of hesitancy around a lot of this, and I get a lot of it may be sensationalized or some of it may be like once in a freak accident, right? Like they happen. But we in the community, and especially, when we're talking about DIC and just people in community in general, we don't have a lot of specialized knowledge in this. And what we do see is the aftermath and what we kind of live with. And so, we from community members and kind of as advocating, SB 181 is kind of what we look to help, mitigate some of these risks, and really what we are expecting, government organizations or the consortium to kind of consider when we are talking about engagement and enforcement. Next slide. So this led to the freshwater usage and why I advocate for recycling produced water and really just, I guess it is my passion to ensure that things are reused and people are benefiting equally with this. We know that water is becoming a scarce resource, and that's why I volunteered to serve on this consortium. Next slide. So we'll start diving into kind of where I think where we can start benefiting from. We did identify barriers in one of our reports. If you recall that, we are doing some prohibition against locating some of this in DI communities, which is great. Next slide. So why do we want to engage the community with this? Ultimately, they live with the fallout of what happens here. Um, there have been several examples within Colorado itself with Superfund sites and things like that, and we don't want being in the community. We don't want to live near. There's not really the community's fault for some of these sites, right? Like the Flatiron, I think it was like Rocky Mountain Flats that has like a Superfund site there as well, and they were proposing to drill over there. Also here next to me is the Lowry Superfund site, and that was classified in the 1980s, and it currently still contains a 1,4-dioxane leak. Community that had lived there for a long time before it was capped, suffered from headaches, nosebleeds, things like that, until it was designated as Superfund site and ultimately capped. They're the one who bears this risk from time to time, from when things do go wrong, right? Everything from soil contamination to long-term health effects, the economic effects of going to the doctor. We know that insurance and healthcare is not cheap, so we 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 just don't, you know, that's the first reason. The second reason is they may have additional knowledge that we just don't have, for why we want to engage the community. Like, hey, did you consider this site, for example? And sometimes it may have just been overlooked during the planning phase, right? Like, so this is why we should bring community in on a discussion for particular sites where early in that planning phase is what are we missing, right? And then the third part and most important part, in my opinion, is this equitable for both parties, right? We want we want the community to benefit as well, and just not just industry. We want what is safe, what is safe for our kids, right? Imagine that someone goes into your community and builds something that impacts your health. How would you ultimately feel? It's kind of goes back to when I was doing humanitarian missions, right? We didn't go there to make it worse. We went there to make it better. And these are some of the I guess some of the tenets that lead every project that I do. How, as a software engineer, I'm working with AI. I am the first to advocate for it, but at the same time, I know what it's capable of, and what I'm not trying to replace people. So I want to enhance their capabilities, and I want to make sure that they are doing, having every opportunity to improve their functions, and ultimately make their lives a lot better. Next slide. Also continued, we want to increase the invocation and practicality. What if, like, they're going to know traffic patterns as well. So, haul routes that may use that as well. They may be the ones sitting behind some of these haul trucks if we decide to use haul trucks. Number five, it also, if you get the community involved in some of the monitoring and actually give them the tools, I know that EPA does the Citizen Science Network, right? We can offset some of the, the positions, because I know ECMC and CDPHE, they're super busy, and we may be facing budget deficits. Why not offload some of that and share that burden with the community? And perhaps CDPHE or whoever is going to start monitoring air quality, water quality, can host classes with some of these communities. It gives them the trust that the data is correct, that they are helping contribute to this pool of knowledge that will be used to help make decisions later on. Right. Also, going into a community, we all have different opinions where we live on how things should be done, or where we should prioritize our goal, right? Like I know in Texas, as we mentioned earlier, that they will be using it in agriculture. So maybe it may work for them, maybe it may not work for what we want to do here. So I would strongly encourage that we go ahead and reach out. And long-term sustainability. We want to be co-owners, we want to be partners in the process of what is going to help this community thrive. What is going to be, what is longevity here? Next slide. So again, I'm just going to reiterate that, early involvement in not just like hosting an open house and say, hey, we're going to do this, and then they ask questions, right? Community should be involved early on in the planning stages of what's going on. They should also be involved throughout the life cycle, all the way until the site is removed, it's being restored, and how should it be restored? Normally we do advocate for the original, I guess, level, or the original sorry, I'm kind of at a loss for words, but essentially we just wanted to be restored back to normal. Equitable participation and benefit sharing, right? Like we want the community to thrive, and if we're going in and just using the roads and not repairing them, and driving heavy machinery up and down when this was perhaps maybe a residential area, that it's not the same. And to bear that cost burden, especially on taxes and things like that, that's not inappropriate. I do not feel that that's appropriate for the local community to take on that extra burden. And any benefits that should happen should be for that local area, not across town, not in a separate jurisdiction. Arapahoe County is huge, so I mean, it doesn't really make sense to build, take something from one area and just shift it all the way down. I think that the way that we kind of do things, and I understand that, from my seat at the local district, that's it's difficult because we have budgeting and we have funds for everything. I think that it's kind of that we need to shift some of our processes to kind of take into account, like, hey, what is going on here? And then, this is just more investment into the community, showing that, hey, we are partners, and you guys are going to benefit through, renovations of parks, things like that, and improvements to the roads that we're, now going to be using a lot more. And then I want to go to the last point. This speaks truly to me, with my family, and my grandma still doesn't speak English. And so I have to do a lot of the translating for her. And we are all, to understand this at a level where it is difficult, because a lot of the, I'm hearing there's some talks where I actually have to do a lot more homework because of the technical jargon, things like that. And explaining that technical jargon in a way in Chinese or Cantonese, in my native tongue, is very difficult, because some of the words may not exist, or some of them may I'll have to explain it in layman's term to them. So it is, make it appropriate for that community, because they're not experts. We're counting on the state and everybody else to kind of improve that enforcement. Next slide. Accessible and transparent, again, like coming from an engineer or, in the Marines, we have jargon for everything, right? And, what I've always learned is, you know, always preface my talks with a point and then a simplified version. We start with a simple version and we continue using that. I know that CDPHE does a good job of it. Sometimes ECMC does a good job of it, but sometimes when I'm sitting in like the hearings and the forms, and I'm just like, okay, what is that form, right? Well, like what does it do? And then I'll have to search it up. Open access to data. This is probably one of the crucial things, that me as an engineer really harp on. We all know that data is especially census data and everything, that is the most important thing when we're making decisions, because we fall back on that data. But if it's not clean and we can't get access to it, or we don't have any way to validate it, how can we trust the system? How can we trust that the decisions that we're making are actually the best that we can possibly do? I do love that ECMC has come out to various communities, with snacks and childcare. I think that we need to continue doing that. And the number one thing that I hear from community is, why are these meetings held at 9 a.m., right? Like, you're at a hearing and it's 9 a.m. and community has to take work off and lose out on those wages to defend their homes, right? Like, it's insane to me that we've kind of come to this point where the normal person has to take time off just to go to these meetings. Some of these meetings should be held on community time if you're going to impact the community, and they have to live with it. Number 5, shared decision-making power. Again, what would you want to happen if an industry came in and and wanted to do something? I personally would try to get a few members from the community and say, hey, you're now representing part of your community, and you have power to influence said decisions, and vote and participate in where some of this revenue may go, from the state or the city or the county, whoever is doling this stuff out. Next, build local capacity. Again, like, I like the idea of using an established program from the EPA of local science. It's very low lift, and train the next group of scientists. Train them. There's so much disinformation right now. How do you combat that? Get them involved, right? Like, these are the processes, and then if they want to challenge those processes, the scientific process, like, it doesn't fail, because it's looking at data, recollecting data, and then making sure that that you're following these steps, and data, scientific principles and kind of outcomes change over time with a lot of data. I as a engineer, I see that every single day. And this will allow the community to take trust in the process. And then accountability, right? Like, how are we following up with the community? Is it just one town hall, or are we going back quarterly, yearly to see how that community is doing? Right? Like, if there's a violation with some of these sites that we so desperately want to permit or create, how do we follow up with these, that odors not being emitted? If we do have open pits to store some of the stuff, that communities not being impacted, right? Like, again, you could use point 6 to build local capacity, and just go talk to them. Say, hey, like, we're gonna host a open house, and we want your feedback on what has happened in the last year, and how can we do better, right? Like, this is what I don't think we do enough of in the state with these operations. Next slide. So this point I think is really important, or at least one of the top five, right? Is how we must change how we do things to be equitable, transparent, and we have to involve local leadership. One of the reasons why I did run for a local, Metro District board seat was I do care about the community, and I'm not looking out for my own interests. I sacrifice tens of hundreds of hours every month to do this stuff, and I have my community's, best interests at heart. So reach out to some of, maybe a local HOA because they don't get paid, but, or maybe a local metro district, to really get some of these answers. And, they field surveys, they have communications with their groups, to just get what the community is really thinking and how they really feel. Next slide. I know that we can't really form cabs, but if there is a project happening, I would suggest at least like getting some sort of community input together. At least some people in the seats to talk and do some bridge building. In Marine Corps, we always do a lot of bridge building, especially with humanitarian efforts, because we do believe that we want to make places. We want to be that best friend. We want to ensure that people can look on us and depend on us, knowing that we are, having their best interests at heart. I'm not going to talk about like how to build a cab. I'm sure that you guys are familiar with it. Next slide. On local community-led research and monitoring. This is one of the things that I really, really want to harp on with CDPHE and whoever else is going to be monitoring the air and water. Get community involved. It's a lot cheaper. You don't, I know that we have a large backlog of sites that need to be visited. Right? If we can get someone to help collect some of that data, and if you train them, then they are part of that network. We can partner with research facilities and schools. I think that it's just a cheap way to do it, and it builds trust in the process. Next. Hold listening sessions. I know that we do hold listening sessions from time to time, but doing it on as a, I guess, a preventative and kind of a precursor, or I forget the word, but do it early and often, right? And make it linguistically, relevant to the people. Don't use huge jargons, and right, like we want to get the community involved and have that community feeling of, hey, I'm gonna host a barbecue for you guys, and by the way, we're gonna just report back to you what we've been doing for the past year or the quarter or whatever time frame we're utilizing. Next slide. And number one thing, safeguards, right? Like we want to, we talk about air quality monitoring, things like that, right? All that data needs to be available. We want the community to trust us. We want, an emergency plan of what's going to happen, right? I know that the ECMC is currently investigating the blowout, right? But, as we get into denser and denser communities, or, if we do things in like near a city, what is the actual plans for evacuation routes? There's communities with one way in, one way out. Like it's going to take hours to evacuate that area. So, community or maybe the Metro Board or an HOA kind of may want to know, what is our plan? How do we plan on making sure that everybody, our neighbors, are safe? Third party, I also think that there should be some dialogue on which vendors we're actually capable of using if we want to go that route for water monitoring, air monitoring. It should be part of the decision process in the planning phase of, hey, who are we going to use? Who do we actually both beneficially trust to do this as to keep us both accountable, both the community and industry. I think that is the last slide. Next slide. It should be the last slide. All right, and I think that's kind of it. Sorry, I kind of, if I kind of went on and blathered, but I think that with the kind of experience that I've had and just navigating the these barriers and what I've seen personally, it's just what I would like as a community member, growing up with my experience. So I'll take questions if you guys have any.
Kevin, thank you very much for your perspective and the amount of time and effort you put into your thoughts there. I thought it was a really well done presentation, great points, and it certainly got me thinking. And so really appreciate your perspective and the information that you provided. You didn't blabber on at all, at least not any more than I do. And so with that, Emma, I wonder if you could drop the screen share so I could see everyone and see if there's any questions. Carmia?
Carmia Woolley with the BLM. So Kevin, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very thorough and I appreciated all of the points that you shared with us. So thinking about your main focus, right, was really, what the value of engaging communities, I guess, and then your vision for how we can engage communities. What, without me knowing, with me being a new member, what has been successful so far in engaging communities?
I think that from what I've witnessed, what is successful is, some of the hearings that I've been going to and, providing. I know that they're kind of small right now, but I think providing just off hours is great. Like, and then, when you're going to a meeting as a family, right? Like I bring my kids sometimes. I don't have time to go home and then make a meal. So sometimes they will provide food and it's great. Because, after working a long day, I have to go to another meeting and plus have to make dinner. I think that's one of the great things. Some meetings do provide bilingual material and I do love the fact that we are providing Spanish translations and translators in some of these spaces, when it's appropriate. And I do think that going to, into the community, that's amazing. Some of the things that I don't think are working, right? Like I think that we push a lot of the community engagement, you know, really far back, to the point where a community doesn't really feel like they're really making an impact, but they're just going there to listen. Sometimes we don't really come out with something that is meaningful that we participate in any meaningful way. It's more of hey, the government's telling us this is happening, so it's happening. So that's kind of like both. Sorry if I did give both and you didn't ask for it.
No, that's great. And with the BLM, I know I've had great conversations with the public at night meetings where there's families, right? And I find probably one of the most effective things is informing participants of the decision space and what is substantive, right? Working for the government, I know personally, usually folks are inclined to share opinions, but I have had really amazing conversations with the public who are informed, right, of the role they can play and the information that is very helpful. So I think if we can be transparent with that, we can get a lot out of it.
Thank you.
Harmony?
Kevin, great presentation, and I appreciate all you do so much. I just want to ask, what do true community benefits look like for you, and are you seeing these currently?
True community benefits, I mean, is more than just like taxes being paid to the city or the county, right? Like it sometimes those benefits are shifted elsewhere, or wherever the county has drawbacks in their budget. For me, what it would look like is, at least monitoring within the community to know that, something, to at least have some trust in what, hey, this is helping prevent our, protect our air, and hopefully like there's some sort of alarm that goes off if something does happen within the community. Parks, right, roads, not having to, as a taxpayer in the community and paying those locals, shopping taxes and stuff like that, to or however we're collecting road taxes for roads, that that's not being pushed on the community who may not be operating some of this heavy equipment to build infrastructure or to haul things around. It's just I think I heard, I'm sorry if this is kind of off base, but there are couples who believe that we should share everything 50-50. I don't believe that. My spouse does not make, probably does not make as much money as I do. And her paying 50% of our expenses, that's not proportional to what she provides. So, I pay a lot more for her, and I don't believe that, and I believe that's more equitable for both of us, because there may be some days, right, like where I might not be able to work anymore and she needs to provide. And she may be taking a larger cost share of that burden, if that day ever comes. So I believe that equity is not a 50-50 thing. It's lifting the other partner in the space. So if it means paying more for the roads because I'm using it more, then it should be said, or it should be done. Yeah, that's just a couple things. I don't want to keep blabbing.
Well, thanks,
Is
Kevin.
that helpful,
Thanks for your
Harmony?
time and thanks for sharing your perspective. It's super important perspective, and thanks for the courage to let us know what you really think. That's not easy to do, and appreciate you being willing to do that for us here today. So thanks for that. With that, next up on our agenda is Commissioner Pinter and Katie Keefe from Adams County sharing their perspective on local government considerations when citing centralized produced water storage and treatment.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Commissioner Emma Pinter, and I will be presenting with one of our staff members, Katie Keefe. Katie had so thoughtfully helped to put together a presentation to cover the local government perspective, but Kevin had done such a good job introducing himself. We thought it would take a minute to also tell you a little bit about who we are and how we serve in our role with Adams County. I will go ahead and start. So I'm Emma Pinter. I'm an Adams County Commissioner. I'm in the middle of my second term with the county, and I previously served on the City of Westminster City Council. I care a lot about local government representation. Having been in my community, I feel like innately I'm a joiner and seek to lean in when we have opportunities to have good discussions. I am an attorney by training, so I guess I'm a recovering attorney and politician, and we can all discuss later which one of those things is worse. But I feel like I get my work done when I have a really good relationship with my expert staff, and that includes Katie Keefe. And I'll let Katie introduce herself and talk about her role within Adams County.
Thanks, Commissioner Pinter. My name is Katie Keefe. I serve as the Environmental Programs Manager for Adams County. I have, almost a 30-year career in environmental health, and natural resource management. And what I love most about my role in Adams County is the ability to really have that direct connection with community, with our public, and all of our stakeholders, and to really just help facilitate conversations and engage all of our stakeholders in ensuring that our operations and land development really are protective of public health, welfare, and the environment. And so it's an exciting role.
We're really lucky to have Katie and her whole team. She has leads a team of experts to help us have the best data available in making decisions, both from a policy perspective, when the county makes public comments to the state, or when we engage in situations like this, where we're in a community conversation about how to produce water. As you can see, Adams County is over 500,000 people. It's about 1,000 square miles. And I serve on a board of 5, and we make our decisions together as a body. So anytime I make a comment, I'm making it as an individual, or I'm able, if possible, reference board direction. So if we go to the next slide. So as was highlighted earlier this morning, we have a significant amount of disproportionately impacted communities. 75% of Adams County census block groups meet the legislative definition of a disproportionately impacted community, with more than half scoring above the 80th percentile, with the state's EnviroScreen tool classifying them as cumulatively impacted communities within the proposed regulation. So when we have a census block, as you can see by the tiny lines, they're reasonably tight. And we know across the state of Colorado, a census block to achieve those numbers could be a very large area of land. But our census blocks for Adams County are tightly clustered, kind of where you'd expect, at the intersection of highways, at the intersection of density along I-25, I-70, et cetera. And we take that really seriously. And as has been mentioned in some of the previous presentations, we have a variety of ways, from electing citizen leaders like myself, to boards and commissions, to being out in community. We just completed a telephone town hall. We're always soliciting feedback. And part of our goal when we do land use is to make sure we do it in public, on the record, and have a transparent process where the public can come and comment. Next slide, please. Our land use authority, which you all are probably familiar with, comes from various statements in Colorado revised statutes. It is the bread and butter of both counties and cities. As a county, we can only regulate the unincorporated sections. We serve as their direct local government, and land use regulation takes place in our cities as well. There are conversations that happen across those borders. For example, right now we are updating our regulations with regard to massage parlors. If you want to have a really uncomfortable conversation, we can also discuss that later, what the regulations are, hours of operations, and liquor licenses. And we know that it doesn't serve us to make regulations in unincorporated and literally across Sheridan Boulevard or Federal Boulevard, Westminster, Federal Heights, et cetera, make a different set of regulations. So we're constantly in communication. We also have our health department. The health department is a county authority, and it is over the entire county. So if Westminster, North Glen, Federal Heights, et cetera, we're seeking the opinion not just of Katie Keefe and the environmental team, but of the health department itself. They would reach out to the Adams County Health Department as their local health authority. And Katie's team works laterally with them to try to make sure that we're all taking advantage of the best data available. Our standards and regulations are essential guide. We try to make them clear and transparent, and we try to update them in that balance between frequently enough so that they're relevant to the modern context, but not so often where it feels like the landscape is shifting. And we always try to prioritize that health, safety, general welfare, and environmental resources of the county, while making sure that the business of running our community can continue. So that's how we try to think about the balance of our developmental standards and regulations. Next slide, please. When talking about balance, this is a list of some of the things that we consider for a conditional use permit. And if it's not a conditional use permit, this consideration of factors ends up being part of how the regulations are drafted themselves. When we're talking about nuisance impacts, I would say my most common bipartisan issue is complaints about truck traffic. Everyone from every background and every demographic cares about truck traffic, which is frankly good for Colorado Produced Water Consortium, because if we get this right, we will have less trucks trucking water and materials that come out of wells back and forth across the state. We have a lot of thought in process. Staff are working really hard on trying to understand how we can better serve our populations, taking all of these factors into account. This is also balanced when you do land use with our whole community and economic development team who think about land use as a whole. And the reason they're partnered with economic development is it's a conversation across the spectrum of industries, jobs, and quality of life offered within Adams County. There are always those trade-offs. You might not like the drive-through line for the Dunkin' Donuts coffee in the morning, but everyone wants their coffee. How do we make that trade-off? Where do you put the drive-through? These are things we deal with on a regular basis. And again, try to have land use regulations that are thoughtful, transparent, and take these factors into account. Regarding the centralized treatment facilities, there are two potentials: the facilities that provide treatment only and facilities that provide more comprehensive management, including treatment along with disposal. We're going to take some time. Katie helped prepare some notes. So I'm going to read through some of this, and then we're both going to be available for questions. Talking about the first type of potential facility, which would likely be classified as a recycling facility given our current land use standards within Adams County. This type of facility is only allowed as a conditional use in zones districts specifically designed for medium to heavy industrial uses and large-scale agricultural due to this particular land use's expected off-site impacts to community and environment. As a local government, when we review those proposals, we require the applicant to submit a comprehensive design operation plan that identifies all possible off-site impacts and the specific engineering process and administrative controls that will be utilized to eliminate or minimize those impacts. So if we could do the next slide. So this is an example of the land use facility perspective. This is something that we work on regularly. And so you can see the different factors that we take into account. This would be an application with our staff, both Katie's team, our environmental team that she leads and works with, but also the land use team, as well as the economic development team, to ensure that all of these factors are being taken into account. So I'm going to read through some of Katie's notes, unless you want to take over and take some of the notes, Katie.
Whatever you feel comfortable with, absolutely.
I'm going to let you take these notes at this point because they're a lot more technical in detail, and we would usually start literally with a staff presentation, questions from the commission, an applicant presentation, questions from the commission, and then public comment. So I'm going to let the technical expert walk through the technical details.
Sure. So in addition to the previous slide, which really got some of the items in the facility design and operations plan that we would be concerned with and want to see addressed in such a plan. We also would want information on produced water characterization. So how that facility is characterizing what is a waste until it comes to them is characterized. And so we'd want to know how they obtain sampling data and vet that it's acceptable for them to receive it and treat it. And then we would also want to know information on how they are testing and characterizing that recycled water post-treatment that will be sent off-site. We would also want information on how they are going to manage the treatment residuals. So since this is recycling only, what are they going to do with spent media, any reclaimed oil, or any other type of secondary waste that's generated from the treatment operations. We would want to know what are the disposal locations that are identified for those waste streams, or potential product, and how will it be transported, and what kind of impacts that would have on the surrounding community considering that facility. There are also setback requirements. These are really kind of particular to the type of land use. And that, of course, is within the context of how impactful that use is to surrounding uses, to community, and its compatibility in the community. So that would be, from the parcel line. It can even be section lines if it's out in the larger agricultural zone areas where those can be 35 acres or more. And then also setbacks from sensitive areas and receptors. So the hope is by, only allowing this in industrial zone districts, that is already isolated more from residential uses and commercial uses. But we would still want to know are they abiding by the setbacks from sensitive receptors, and then also sensitive environmental areas. So that could be rivers, creeks, streams, wetlands, wildlife habitat areas. And then, as Commissioner Pinter had identified, we also require a traffic impact assessment. And that would include, typically those are done by third-party engineering firms, and that would include mitigation measures that are necessary based on the impacts from that facility. That could include a requirement to only allow pipeline conveyance of produced water and the recycled produced water going out. Perhaps even oil that's recovered, depending on truck trips that are projected for that facility. And then also it would identify haul routes. So kind of what Kevin had spoken to earlier is, what are the impacts to our infrastructure and surrounding roads, and what would be their part in making sure that that infrastructure is maintained to the level prior, and what the community expects. We would also expect to see a decommissioning plan. So what happens to the site when operations cease? And so how will they bring it back to the antecedent conditions before those operations began? What will they be doing with their equipment? Where is that going to be going? How will they plan for and financially support the decommissioning of that facility? And then throughout the process, at the beginning of any type of review, the applicant, potential operator, they're required to hold a neighborhood meeting to gather comments from the community, identify any concerns that they have, and then that goes all the way through to public hearing, where public comments can be submitted. And so the applicant is required to respond to those community concerns and public comments, and identify how those are being addressed within their design and operations plan, and other, I guess, any type of other plan that they have for the facility. We also incorporate any comments we would receive from referral agencies. That would include CDPHE, ECMC, our fire districts, our natural resource conservation districts, anybody that potentially would have input on the proposed use. And so those have to be addressed, and any comments and regulations that they identify have to be incorporated into any type of proposal that we would recommend for approval by our Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioners. We also would require an environmental or performance bond with the facility. So that would include everything from operation to spill or remediation, and then all the way through decommissioning. And then along with that, my team often includes, as part of any type of permitting process for a facility like this, reporting requirements that they are subject to specifically for the county. We would want And we can set the frequency of that, but that would include environmental data, any air quality data they're required to collect, any type of community complaints that they receive and how they responded to it and what they did to mitigate any concerns. So we can set that as a condition of approval of any permit, really, and recommend that to be incorporated based on Planning Commission and Board of County Commissioner decision. And then since this is a conditional, this would be a conditional use permit. The permit term length can be set by our deciding body, the Board of County Commissioners, and we could recommend anything from, say, a 3-year, 5-year, or 10-year, and that would require them to come back to renew the permit or get an extended permit, and that allows us to really monitor how they are they a good community neighbor? Are they operating their facility correctly? Are there a lot of concerns? So it's a way to allow a reevaluation of the facility rather than just having a permit term that doesn't have an expiration. And then next slide. And then in thinking of this, the next potential type of produced water facility could be a facility that has treatment, impoundment facilities, and disposal. So it's more of a comprehensive produced water management facility. Currently, our land use regulations in Adams County prohibits injection wells. So we do not allow new underground injection control class 2 wells in unincorporated Adams County. We also our regulations specifically don't allow open pits or lagoons for produced water storage, which would also be more of a constraint from the ozone non-attainment area, to be honest, even if we didn't have restrictions against them. But let's say a hypothetical scenario that our regulations did allow it. This type of facility, we would, under our current structure, classify such a facility as a solid waste disposal facility. And that then would require a certificate of designation, which is identified via statute for in the Solid Waste Control Act or Solid Waste Act. And it is a much more extensive permitting process. We would require all the same submittals, and we would also require engineering plans. So engineered design plans that are stamped by a PE. It would also have to be reviewed by CDPHE, their solid waste management unit, and for feedback approval. And it would also go to our health department, their solid waste team as well, for review. And it would require multiple neighborhood meetings and possibly up to 4 public hearings, just how the certificate of designation process works. There would be 2 hearings at Planning Commission and 2 hearings at Board of County Commissioners, all of those allowing for and facilitating public comment as well. And it would have to meet all of the criteria of approval for a solid waste disposal facility before it would be allowed to develop and operate in unincorporated Adams County.
So that's our presentation. Land use is complicated and local siting is always a multi-factored conversation. Happy to take any questions or share any examples that might be helpful for the consortium.
Great. Thank you both. That was a great presentation on local land use processes and super helpful to hear different ways of doing things. And, local governments are experts at land use. And so I appreciate the work that Adams County does on the topic. Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair Messner. Emma, it was really a very informative presentation for me, not ever being involved in county administration. You made a point early on that sometimes the regulations inside cities that are within Adams County aren't aligned with the regulations you have. And I'm curious about the prohibition against UIC Class 2 wells. Is that common with the cities that are within your county?
Oh, I actually don't know that I have a full survey of our cities. I think it's unique to each one. Katie, do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't, I do, I believe Commerce City has something similar, but I'm not aware of the other municipalities. Keeping in mind they are much more dense, and so finding an area where such a facility could operate would be more challenging, versus say Adams County, where our unincorporated areas, east of the airport are pretty open.
Of course, yeah. So curious, because as you may know, we've had some discussions about the potential of using USC wells to bring up previously injected produced water to solve the surface storage problem. So it was interesting to me to hear that UIC wells, class 2 wells, were not allowed in the county. Thanks.
Carmia?
Hello, Carmia Woolley with BLM. Emma and Katie, thank you so much for your presentations. Very informative. This is a general question, so zooming out, and I don't know if you'll have an answer. It's okay if you don't, but how do your land use processes compare to other counties? Did you look at what other counties were doing nearby? Just curious to know what your thoughts are, what you've seen.
Yeah, I think we both should give an answer on that. They're very similar to other cities and also counties. County authority is a little unique because we also have the health department. And if you were a city, you'd be asking your health department for input as opposed to them being lateral staff. But cities and counties frequently talk to each other when they're close near neighbors. However, we also all go to Colorado Municipal League and talk to each other when you're on cities, and we all go to CCAT or CCI or CC4CA, any one of the C groups. And we talk a lot about this topic and try to get it right. And we also frequently ask when developing development standards, one of the main criteria when we're making a change is what is the standard in the near peer organizations, the near peer local governments, so that we have that yardstick as we are making the developmental standard change. So I don't know what you'd add, Katie.
Yeah, the only thing I think I would add is we also consider local governments as referral agencies for comments. So depending on where the development is, we may be reaching out to our local government partners for their review and insight and comments on such a development project. And then to Commissioner Pinter's point, when we do promulgate our own development standards and regulations, or we amend those regulations, we do reach out. We'll often do a benchmark of, other county and city regulations, and then we do reach out for their participation in the process as stakeholders to better inform those regulations.
And also this relevant state agencies who we presume are doing similar benchmarking as well. So we'll ask the relevant state agencies for their comment.
Carmia, did you have a follow-up?
I'll ask another question after Rick. Thank you so much for your responses.
Okay, Rick.
And I thank you both for the presentations and information, very informative and very comprehensive. With regards to the prohibition of Class 2 UIC wells in unincorporated areas of Adams County, when that was originally put in place, was it over a concern over potential contamination of groundwater? Was it a concern over an increase in truck traffic in an area, or was it a combination of the above, or what was the driving force behind that prohibition?
I can
you can go first, Katie.
Because I kind of led in 2019. I led the development of our comprehensive oil and gas facility regulations post SB 181, and it had been more of a practice or a policy up until that point, and that prohibition was incorporated into our oil and gas regulations, and it was primarily based on concerns from the community, a lot of the unknown unknowns, and a lot of the potential risks of such a facility to the county.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
Carmia?
Okay, so Katie and Emma, one more time. When you all were presenting the processes and what would be required, a lot of it is familiar to what I've seen with other levels of government. So with that, would Adams County require their own unique submittals, or would the county recognize other requirements, for instance, of state governments or federal governments? For instance, bonds is a prime one, right? Would there be double, triple bonding on entities?
For certificate of designation landfills, the statute specifically, prohibits us from requiring additional financial assurance. Recycling facilities are a little bit different. So we do have the authority to require a performance bond. It wouldn't be a double bond. It would just be, submittal of documentation that bond is sufficient, if it is required by a state agency, that it sufficiently meets those requirements. So it's not as though they would have to double bond.
Yeah, and I know you're asking about bonding, but it also applies to a number of different classes of regulations. And there's certain regulatory authority that's held by us as the county. There's certain regulatory authority and check-in that's held by the health department, by a state agency, state inspectors versus our local inspectors. And we do have some IGAs where our local inspectors have the authority to inspect to a standard that the state is the one who holds the authority. And so then those inspections are then promulgated up, passed up to the state for enforcement. That's newer in the past 4 or 5 years, but has been a real priority of ours to make sure that we are not duplicating authority that is vested with the state, but as the local agency on the ground, that we can have our inspectors and Katie's team have those regulations in mind when looking at a facility. And this covers all types of land use matters where the actual authority to have the inspection, to collect the data, and to publish the data is held by a different agency. And then we do our best on our website, which is the primary way that folks access our information, to link to the relevant agency that is holding the report out data from whatever air quality, water quality inspection standard needed to be met for the land use permit to go through.
Excellent, thank you.
Wade?
Emma, Katie, excellent presentation, and thank you for that level of detail. I just had a question similar to your prohibition for UIC wells. Do you have existing prohibitions for surface storage, maybe more specifically open pit kind of storage?
Yes. Yep, that is correct. They were included as a prohibition in our 2019 oil and gas regulations.
And just as a follow-up, is there a mechanism for reprieve, or I don't want to use, sometimes words are empowering, I don't want to say protest necessarily, but is there a mechanism for appeal to change a ruling of that kind with respect to the county?
That's a good question. I would actually probably have to run that through our county attorney's office because it is specified as a prohibition. I don't know if our variance process would actually be applicable in that sense. The only thing I would say, just being in the non-attainment area, there are specific, emission thresholds that those, open impoundments have to comply with that could also present a bigger challenge perhaps than just the local government, prohibition on those types of facilities.
Great, thank you.
Irene?
Yes, thank you, Irene Andrus. So I see that you have, as you said, the prohibition on open pits. So what are the regulations on pits as opposed to open pits?
You mean the actual containers, like produced water storage containers?
Yeah, what is allowed? You're saying open pits are not allowed. So what kind of water storage is allowed?
It would have a tank, some type of enclosed structure. And in this type of facility, we would want to see the more modern type of storage containers for produced water, the kind that are specifically built to control emissions.
So a covered pit would not be allowed either. Is that correct?
Correct. If it's earthen, it wouldn't be allowed. If it's actually a pit that's constructed, earthen pit, we would not allow that.
So no pits. You would only accept containers.
Containers, correct.
Thank you.
Barbara?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on disposal of produced water in the county. Where does it go?
We do actually have, I think, what are two historical wells, but I have not yet been able to identify if they're still in operation. Most of our produced water, I do believe, heads north in DeWitt County. We do have, I believe at this point now, a new one was constructed. We have 3 produced water pipelines. And that do connect to some of our larger oil and gas facilities, like PDC and extraction wells. And then the other facilities, it's often trucked off site. So they do have large produced water tanks for as the facility is in production. When those do eventually get filled up, then that is trucked off site if they are not connected to produced water pipeline.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again. I have just a couple of questions. So I think I understand the difference between recycled facility versus centralized produced water treatment facility. But maybe clarify that for me a little bit. I mean, I understand the class 2 injection well piece. Is that the only thing that differentiates a centralized produced water treatment facility versus a recycled facility, or is there other?
Well, we don't currently in our code have a use type that is specifically centralized produced water facility.
Okay.
So in thinking of the most applicable land use types that this could be classified as, those were the 2, really. If it's just treatment only, it would more similarly align with a recycling facility land use type classification. If it involved disposal as well, then that it would go with our disposal facility classification. And that is not to say that at some point, staff may bring to the Board of County Commissioners a proposal to develop specific standards and regulations for centralized produced water facilities that, would be very specific to that type of facility. And then it would be at their discretion whether or not to direct us to, start that public process to promulgate those regulations.
Okay, that's great. And then understanding that there has to, in some of these instances, the industrial zoned areas are where you're hoping to direct some of these activities. And without having looked at the maps at all, from disproportionately impacted community standpoint, is it common to see those industrial zoned areas in disproportionately impacted communities, or is that not the case? I guess I don't know.
It's a bit of mix of both. And honestly, the industrial zoned areas that are located in our DIC, predominantly on the southwest portion of the county, the dimensions of those parcels most likely would not be able to accommodate a treatment facility and comply with setbacks.
Because the
requirements, yeah.
census block is so tight, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, follow that. Okay, that's super helpful. And then I wonder, just last question, and Commissioner Pinter highlighted that one of the biggest nuisance complaints is truck traffic. Are there other kind of big highlight kind of impacts that you see community most concerned about in Adams County?
Yeah, I go ahead, Commissioner, you can start.
Was looking at my other screen to find an example if anyone has a few hours of their time to burn. We just did a facility that is similar. It's a waste management facility on April 15th. It is Conservation Services. It was a liquid waste disposal facility, and we just went through a land use matter on this. I linked the agenda and the name of it. It is the last land use item. There's a solar discussion immediately prior, which isn't going to be super relevant. But if you had time to burn and you're like, how would Adams County in real time, we did this in April with a facility that was for disposal. So you can look at how that went, what the concerns are from the public. There are the applicant concerns, which are valid and taken seriously, and they are frequently residents themselves. And those are frequently around balancing our economy, industry access to public good, being in the market square, like as it were, jobs created, role in the overall economy. Public concerns, truck traffic is a universal one. They don't want anything that makes noise. Especially hours of operation end up being a really big deal. They end up the nuisance pieces of our slide that were listed, noise, air quality, smell, and then you start getting into some of the public health questions. Will this affect my water? Does it smell bad? Is it toxic? How toxic is it? How often will it be toxic? Who's monitoring that? Where can I see that data? It ends up being a really robust conversation. The further out you get in our big rectangle of Adams County, you also start having conversations about, will this affect my crops? Will this affect my livestock? Will this affect my quiet enjoyment of my agricultural land if you put an industrial facility next to it? Closer in, people don't have as much livestock, maybe a backyard chicken or two, and it ends up being a proximity concern around the air quality, water quality, noise pollution, what's going to happen.
Great. Thanks for answering my questions. Carmia, and then that'll be the last question on this one so we can keep moving forward.
So as we're talking about traffic concerns and not allowing treatment facilities, produced water treatment facilities and disposal sites, where are the nearby locations that are providing the treatment and disposal? So we have a sense about the traffic.
I am not aware of a centralized produced water treatment facility per se as of yet in unincorporated Adams County. As far as disposal, I believe the nearest injection control wells are located just north over the border in Will County. At this point, I believe it's almost about 60%, maybe 70% of our larger oil and gas pads are connected to produced water pipeline. So to Commissioner Pinter's point about traffic impacts, like when those facilities come up, we assess traffic impact fees based on those fees can be offset by their connection to crude oil, gas, and produced water pipeline. Because that is expected to reduce, traffic, truck trips.
Great. Well, thank you both for providing that information and the local government perspective, and super helpful for me. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So next up, we've got Mr. Rick McCurdy, Vice President, Innovation and Sustainability for Select Water Solutions, providing perspective on technical considerations when building centralized storage and treatment. Welcome, Rick. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman Mesner. And I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this topic at our meeting today. And a couple of things to point out going in. Number one, some of my slides are going to have what looks like more of a commercialized language because it was part of them I pulled out of a slide deck that we do use for marketing purposes. So don't focus too much on that language about how great Select is. Just listen to me talk about the information you're seeing on the slide. As I mentioned earlier in our discussion, the produced water desal pilot that's been running out in the Permian has been consuming a ton of my time. I've been out there the last 3 weeks in a row, including this week. So that's why I had to kind of borrow some slides from another presentation to get this put together. The other thing I'll say in here is I really do appreciate the information that Emma and Katie just shared, because as we look to this goal of increasing more produced water reuse in our operations and reducing freshwater use, particularly in the DJ Basin. You're obviously, when I'm talking about some of the things that allows us, and I mean us Select, to do large scale produced water reuse in other areas of the U.S. A lot of that, what enables us to do that is going to conflict with the rules that we're seeing or put forth regarding prohibitions, regarding disposal, regarding open impoundments and stuff like that. So if we can go to the next slide. So this is a standard disclaimer that the company requires that I put in the slide, and I tell people every time I do a presentation somewhere that no need to read all this. Essentially what this will tell you is that Mr. McCurdy is a loose cannon and Select Water Solutions is not responsible for anything that comes out of his mouth. But essentially that's it. It's just saying I'm gonna present the information that I have available. A lot of it is my opinions. Some of the information I've presented is based on information I have available to me at the time and could change in the future. So should you make any kind of investment decisions or marketing decisions or based on this information, Select Water Solutions cannot be responsible. Next slide. All right. So roughly in the 15, 20 minutes so here, we're going to go through this. When we talk about these centralized water treatment facilities, well, there's more than just the facility. There's delivery operations, there's gathering operations, there's everything that rolls into one. So I'm going to run through these roughly a dozen or so slides, and we're going to talk about treatment and storage of produced water. We're going to talk about pipelines, the necessary pipelines that are needed to help reduce truck traffic and move water around. We can't put a pipeline everywhere, so we're going to talk about what the industry does with regards to last mile delivery. Just briefly touch on disposal and why it's still necessary. But I'm glad emissions have come up quite a bit because I wanted to put a slide in here to talk about emissions and emission reduction and some of the things that are available to us to consider in the future. And then lastly, I just want to throw a couple of slides in to really emphasize how much technology and automation plays a part of safely and effectively doing this produced water treatment and reuse. Next slide. So this is a grouping of photographs of various produced water and recycling facilities we have around the U.S. Of course, you see the majority of them are in West Texas and New Mexico. The one on the top row, third from the left, that's our Weld County facility that I believe many of y'all had the opportunity to visit last year. I wasn't able to come in town for that, but got to go up and see that. That's our Lone Star recycling and disposal facility. And right off the bat, the first thing, just looking at all these photos, the first thing that you notice the difference there is, of course, based on regulations, all the water that's handled at that Lone Star facility is all within completely sealed tanks, right? So there's nothing open to that or anything like that. Now, a disadvantage of that is that restricts us on the amount of treated, clean, produced water that we would have available to move to a completion Roughly at the maximum that can hold at any given time is 8,000 barrels of water. So that's all that's available to move off to completion, which that's a start. But by comparison, when we take a look at some of these other photos, if you take the one right to the left of the Lone Star facility, that's our South Curtis Ranch facility that sits just 4 miles outside of Midland. And those three large rectangular impoundments at the back of the photo, that's 2 million barrels of water setting in. If we go down to the bottom left-hand corner, that's our Lost State facility in New Mexico, and the 4 ponds there together are holding in excess of 3 million barrels of water. So that's the amount of clean produced water that we have available to move off to completion at any given time. That's what enables us, particularly in West Texas, to supply 100% produced water for completion. If you're looking at a single well completion in West Texas or New Mexico, you're looking at needing 100,000 barrels of water per day delivered to that site. Now, that's one way. The industry is moving away from that. The industry is starting to move to what's referred to as simul-fracs and trimul-fracs. And that's where you have 2 to 3 frac spreads on a location, and you're hitting 2 to 3 wells on that pad at the same time. And to do that, you have to supply as much as 300,000 barrels of treated produced water a day for that location. Well, that's why you need those large volumes of water, because you're going to do that over a 7 to 10 day period. Thus, even though you've got water coming in, you don't near have that much water coming into these facilities. The bottom left-hand corner, the Lost State facility, that's 120,000 barrels of incoming water a day. The South Curtis Ranch facility I mentioned up there in the top, that's anywhere from 60 to 120,000 barrels of water a day. So the consumption, particularly for 100% produced water frac, far exceeds the incoming capacity of the water. Thus, why we need the water storage in order to keep up the completions. So now, I'm going to have a slide later in the deck talking about emissions, and I didn't mention this on there, but if you look at that South Curtis Ranch facility, the second photo from the left in the top row, right at the very bottom corner, you'll see some tanks ahead of the big round circle, which that big round circle is in a 60,000 barrel above ground storage tank. The little tanks in front of it, that's a set of gun barrels. So all the produced water coming into it comes into enclosed gun barrels where free oil and dispersed oil are separated and removed from that water prior to it moving out to that above ground storage tank. Above ground storage tank is where all the initial treatment takes place to remove iron, other solids out of the water. Then we will process through a system I'll discuss later on called dissolved air flotation to separate all that and remove it out of the water before it gets kicked out to the impoundments in the back. Next slide. Now, I understand there's concern over these impoundments. We see these impoundments, and well, what about odors? What's going to come off of those? Well, first of all, we're removing the vast majority of any VOCs. The VOCs are going to come in with oil, any dissolved gases. Those are getting removed up front in that tankage or going through that dissolved air flotation treatment system. Once the water gets kicked off out to these impoundments, it doesn't have any particularly hydrocarbon odor or anything like that. The one thing we do have to be concerned about is because they are open air and there are literally a gajillion microbes floating around the air at any time, they will get into that water. If you let that water go septic meaning there's no oxygen available in the water, then anaerobic bacteria take over. And anaerobic bacteria, particularly sulfate-producing bacteria, can produce hydrogen sulfide gas, and they will start to get an odor. To prevent that, what we do is we aerate these impoundments continually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The large photo on the right, you see all the little white dots in that pond. Those are aeration bubblers that are laying on the bottom of that pond. Typically, these impoundments are 12 to 15 foot deep. And we continually pump compressed air into those, and it comes up and it keeps that water saturated with oxygen, which prevents those anaerobic bacteria from growing. Now, that's always a challenge in keeping these aeration systems effectively doing their job. I included the bottom left photo, and it's real grainy. That's a Google Earth image. That South Curtis Ranch facility I was talking about just in the previous slide. We weren't happy with the aeration system that was in it. We use a term called oxidation reduction potential, or ORP, to tell us if we're effectively aerating those ponds. It's a very quick measurement. And generally you want a positive ORP. And we were having a hard time maintaining that in that pond. So this past summer, we had the opportunity. We went and drained the ponds down during a frac spread, getting rid of a lot of water. And we went in and took out the aeration systems that were in there, replaced it with the system I sourced out of Pennsylvania. And now you can see, compare the aeration, that photo, that Google Earth photo of how that pond looks now compared to what a similar pond looks like that with other aeration system. The one we've got in there now is very effectively controlling and oxidizing the water, saturating it with oxygen. Next slide. So, in addition to doing this, a large part of keeping trucks off the road is building pipeline systems to where we can move this treated produced water around to different areas to where we can use it successfully in our completions. This is an example of some of the pipeline systems that we currently have in various areas within the U.S. Obviously, you see over the Delaware Basin, and I need to be open and honest about that. That system is not completed. About 80% of it's completed right now, but some of the drawings also reflects secured right-of-way where we will be putting pipe in the ground, probably during this year. So that's a large pipeline system for produced water. That's in the upper Delaware Basin. And then down below it, you see the Midland Basin with pipeline systems that are moving water around the various counties. Over in East Texas, that's actually a gathering system. The Haynesville Shale, which is predominantly in Louisiana, the geography over there is not really suitable to disposal, whereas the geology over in Texas, the eastern part of Texas, is. So we're the only company that has a 14-inch gathering pipeline that is bored underneath the Sabine River. So we have gathering locations within Louisiana that picks up produced water. It gets pumped underneath the Sabine River into East Texas to where it goes into the set of disposal wells that are scattered that we own in East Texas. Next slide. So when we talk about the pipeline system and how much of it is necessary for this large scale reuse. So we currently have over 1,000 miles of both above ground and buried infrastructure. We have 16 million barrels of that above ground storage, or not above ground, but those surface impoundments that we talked about. Typically, between all our systems, that's an outdated number right now. We're bringing in roughly 1 million barrels a day to recycle and move back out again. And then later on, we're going to talk a little bit more about automation. Next slide. So this is the last mile delivery that I talked about. We can't put an in-ground pipeline to every single pad because that's an inefficient use of money, not to mention that it would be, you're just putting, pipelines are very expensive to put in, especially the large diameter HDPE pipelines. And so you want them to be able, so what we typically do is we try to arrange our pipeline corridors to where we're within 10 miles of where the water is going to be needed on either side of that pipeline. And then we'll have risers that come up periodically along that pipeline, come up out of the ground. And then we use what we commonly refer to as lay flat hose. And lay flat flow is being used now in the DJ, but for movement of fresh water, right? But here we're using it also for produced water in West Texas. So we're moving produced water through this temporary lay flat hose. The hose that I'm showing here is a line that we sourced this last year. It is probably, and I'm not biased, but it is the best lay flat hose in our industry right now. It has the highest both operating and internal burst pressure of any lay flat that's out there. Comes with some special considerations. It's built with a reflective striping, so it's easy to see at night, which sometimes gets kind of difficult because most of these hoses are either dark blue or black. This way, when a light hits it, it just lights up at night. All of the hose, typically the hose comes in 500-foot reels. All of the hose has a QR code on it to where we maintain a history of where it's been used, how much water's been pumped through it, what kind of water's been pumped through it, what chemicals were in the water that got pumped through it. The hose is built, the 2-layer hose. The outer layer is very abrasion resistant, and then the inside layer, the layer, is a chemical and chemical resistant, also resistant to swelling when in the presence particularly of salt water. And as you can see in the bottom right photo, it's available in a lot of different diameters, from 4-inch there on the right all the way up to 16-inch on the left. And when I started talking about those larger volumes of water that we're seeing on these simul-fracs and trimul-fracs applying that, well, to give you an example, the just left the center, that's a 10-inch hose. A 10-inch hose, we can supply roughly 80,000 barrels of water a day through that 10-inch hose. By moving to that 16-inch hose, we can now supply 3 times that volume through that one hose at any given time. Next slide. So as much as our goal is to try to reuse as much produced water as we possibly can, we're never going to probably get away from you having some form of disposal. And we're going to need disposal wells. We're going to need class 2 wells in various locations. One reason for that is just because you're reusing 100% of your water, if you get to that lofty goal, that doesn't mean you need to go somewhere every single day. So in the meantime, if you don't have a storage available to you, then it's going to have to go down a disposal well. The other reason being is we're in an industry that's driven by commodity price. And that's something we're looking at right now as we see oil prices soften back down into the upper 50s, low $60 a barrel. Then that starts making a lot of operators start to pull back on their completion schedules, meaning they're going to start pushing some completions back, not do them right now, not spend the money. When that happens and you're still producing oil and gas and you're producing water along with it, if you don't have a completion to reuse that water in, you need to dispose of that water. That's why we need the disposal wells still in different areas. And then when we talk about waste generation, and in the future, when we start talking about the potential to treat this water and recover some beneficial volume out of it, there's going to be a discussion about, is there going to be any waste streams generated? Ideally, the type of technology that I like to see used to recover beneficial use of produced water, I like technology that doesn't produce a lot of waste. All I want is a clean, relative, fresh, either distillate or permeate, and then a concentrated brine. And we're going to take that concentrated brine and put it down a class 2 UIC, which is the most effective way to dispose of that waste. Next slide. So when we start talking about emissions reductions, I mentioned earlier that one of the areas that is a concern is in the treatment process. A lot of companies, a lot of midstream water companies such as Select, when we're treating and reusing produced water, we're using this top technology, dissolved air flotation. And essentially what it does is you put an oxidizer into the produced water along with a flocculant, give it some reaction time, and then you push it through this dissolved air flotation unit. The unit you're looking at right there will handle about 60,000 barrels of water a day by itself. As these solids come together in this water, due to the flocculant and due to the oxidizer taking iron out of solution, making it a solid, you're putting in just a gazillion tiny bubbles at the bottom of this thing. As the bubbles come floating up through it, solids are attaching to it. They end up floating to the top of the water and forming a sludge layer on top. In the photo on the right, the little bar you see across the top there with the strip, what that is a series of paddles running on a chain, and those paddles are continually, slowly moving along the top of that water, dragging those solids off into a trough where they get pulled out, pushed to a filter press for dewatering to get ready for disposal. If you're going to see emissions in this process, it would be right there at the top of that because you're continually bringing an air column up through there. However, you can buy covers that fold on to the top of these tabs to where you can capture the emissions coming off there and send it to a flare or to a combustion. The other area where there is concern over emissions, we talked about the open air impoundments earlier, is in tank storage. Now, we do have larger volume tank storage. The typical tanks we were looking at that Lone Star facility are basically 500-barrel storage tanks. The one we're looking at there in the bottom, what's referred to as a minion tank, that one there will hold about 18,000 barrels of water. And as you see that bow top, that's a sealed bladder that covers the top of that tank. So it's not exposed to the air at any time. And those tanks such as this, even the impoundments that I showed you earlier, as well as the big round circular above ground storage tanks, all of those are built with dual liners with leak detection between the two liner systems inside. So if the inner liner leaks, we automatically get an alarm, and then we know we need to empty that tank and we're prepping. So that's what helps us ensure that we're going to get water out into the containment. Next slide. And this is where it really comes into focus that this, to safely and effectively treat and reuse this water and move it around, it's not a simple process. There's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of automation that goes into this to ensure that we do it accurately and safely. And that automation can be anywhere from how we're monitoring the ponds, what's in them, what levels in them, what kind of bottoms they look like, total volume in it, whether the volume's coming up or down. A lot of that can be done through drone surveys or pump surveys. Our pump automation, where possible, and of course, in a lot of areas where oil and gas operations are in place now, a lot of times we don't necessarily have an electrical grid in place to support those operations, so you end up running off a lot of diesel-powered equipment. And where possible, we're trying to move away from that. So as we get into areas where we do have access to grid power, we're trying to build out, particularly our transfer pumps and stuff like that, build them out with electric motors on them to where we can tie into the grid and use electricity to power those pumps instead of using diesel all the time. When we talk about data storage, nowadays we're all familiar with our data being stored in the cloud. Well, we're a water company, so we prefer to our cloud as our data lake. And that's where all the gathering information throughout our operation gets stored into that data lake or that cloud. For us, that's predominantly on a bunch of servers down in Austin, Texas, and I don't know why who they contracted with, and then it's backed up in 2 different locations to where we have that as well. Field automation, when we're blending this water and putting it together, and I'll show you a picture here, I think in the next slide or the slide after that, is we have what's called an automated proportioning manifold. So if we're mixing 2 waters and you say my targeted goal is I want to see 25% produced water use, well, we can put conductivity probes into the inlet streams of both water and outlet streams. And as that water is being fed to that manifold, it will automatically throttle valves to where we get that exact mixture of water going to the completion side. Next slide. And then another part of this, that talked about that water blending rate, moving things along. Additionally to that, we've got pressure monitoring all along those, particularly like those above ground, that last mile delivery system. There are pressure sensors all along those where those connections are at in that, and it's constantly being monitored. Where if we see a variation outside of what we expect to see, and when I say what we expect to see based on modeling for the topography and everything that we're running through, then that sends an alarm up and gets us prepared to shut down the system. Next slide. And then lastly, when I talk about all this data and all this monitoring and everything that we're doing, what do we do with it? Well, that photo on the left-hand side is very good. We have several of those real-time monitoring systems around the U.S., and operators are sitting there watching that information 24 hours a day, watching for alarms, watching for systems, making adjustments where necessary, in addition to the field staff that we have watching it as well. So we had some twofold process. You have field staff that are out there on top of the system in the field and are why that popped up, and are walking those lines or driving those lines or flying those lines with drones depending on what time of day it is, as well as you have dedicated staff that are in there monitoring all this automation on a continual process. If they're getting alarmed, they're shutting equipment down, they're notifying maintenance people, they're sending people out to check everything. So all of this is a very automated, very monitored process. And I think that could be one more, and I think that is my last slide, and it is. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to talk about this today, and I'll be happy to take any questions anybody might have.
Thanks, Rick. Great presentation, lots of information there. I imagine we'll have some questions. Start with Carmia.
Thank you, Rick, for presenting. I like how much information you presented, and really a lot of the headaches, right, that people try to address. So one of the main ones that, in my experience, is volatile organic compounds, and you spoke to those a lot throughout your presentation. So, so when it comes to removing those, treating those, right, minimizing them in the treated water, you noted that there's the gun barrel tanks, but in my experience, even when it goes through the gun barrel tanks, it removes the gases, but there's still a lot of volatiles within the produced water. So then you presented the air flotation, that the water is agitated, right? And in the example you showed, it was exposed to the atmosphere. So volatiles, right? If they're agitated, they will disperse into the atmosphere. So that still doesn't exactly, nip the issue in the bud, so to speak. So you mentioned that flotation can be covered. Yep. So have you seen many instances of where that is covered? If it is indeed effective, actually enclosing it, or if it's just partial. My experience speaks otherwise. I am familiar with the minion tanks, but once again, that I haven't seen them, have an agitation part to them. And how practical is that in implementation?
So to be perfectly honest, Carmia, is that while those covers are available, they are not in use in a lot of different areas simply because of the fact that regulations don't require them. However, they were made just in case if that was an option and somebody wanted it. And I will tell you, based on the studies that we have done and some of the drone surveys we've done, particularly in West Texas, New Mexico, you do see a spike in VOCs when that drone passes over those DAF units, which you should expect. The good news is you don't see it over those impoundments because you are effectively getting rid of most of the VOCs within there. And I agree with you completely. While the gun barrel situation up front is going to help just getting free oil off of there to where it's not carrying out into an open air, those above ground storage tanks. That doesn't necessarily take care of the VOCs that are dissolved in the water. Whereas the agitation with air in the starting room will bring a lot of them out of that water. So at some point in time, we probably do need to fit a cover on one of those to where we can see just effectively how much we're pulling off of there and doing that. It's unfortunately that's how industry works. If it's not required, why spend the money to go do that? So, but it would be a good experiment to test and validate that thesis.
Irene?
Thank you. Thanks so much for your presentation, Rick. This is really great. I'm looking at slide 4, where you showed the pictures of all the different treatment facilities. One thing I wasn't clear during your presentation was what is produced water and what is treated produced water. So on a lot of those open ponds that we're seeing, are those all treated produced water or produced water?
So in that photo, every one of those that are a rectangular impoundment, that's all treated produced water. Any of those that would be in the circular above ground storage tanks would be an untreated produced water. That's the buffering zone for the water coming in, right? So might have variable rates of water at any given time during the day. So those above ground storage tanks allow us to maintain a certain volume at all times to where we can then smoothly, because the treatment process is designed to work with a relatively smooth volume of water.
So are any of these ponds covered? Like especially the untreated?
No. You can buy surface liners for those above ground storage tanks. They make them all the way up to the 60,000 barrel capacity, which these are. Historically, though, it's a great concept, but even in West Texas, New Mexico, you get rain. And it's a floating cover, so when you get rain on top of it, it can effectively shove that cover down into the produced water, and then you start having issues with stuff getting on top of the floating cover itself.
Okay. And then on slide 6, is there nothing in the DJ? As far as
very little pipeline infrastructure now in the DJ. No.
Oh, and then on slide, well, I'm not sure this one is, but the West Texas also produced water. Sorry, I'm not sure what my note meant there, so I'm going to skip that one. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eileen.
Barbara?
Hey, Rick, really great presentation. Carmia asked the question I was going to ask about the DAF and enclosure. When you talk about monitoring, you just said drone overflight, you see VOCs coming off the DAF. Do you have any quantification for that? And secondly, in your monitoring, when you said drone and boat, do people actually go out on those lakes in a boat to monitor? And what are they monitoring?
So first of all, I do not have a quantification. I don't have a number I can give you off of the DAS now. I just know from having talked to our people and talking to third parties that have done drone surveys that they'll go, well, we flew over this section, we didn't see any problem. We flew over here, we did see a spike in emission. Now, as far as the boats, there's a couple of different things. First of all, I talked about those aeration systems. So there's a couple of ways you can install those. One's a dry install, which is preferable because then there's no water in the impoundment. People can just walk down into it and set these things where they go. The other one is a wet install, where you actually put a barge out on there, a 2-man barge, and you put ropes that stretch all the way across it to where a team can move them and position them, and then they lower these aerators down into the water. Or they can sample. But what I'm talking about here is we have a series of remote controlled boats. The boats are essentially about 5 foot long, and they have sonar mappers in the bottom of them. And we can program those things to run like a pattern across that impoundment and come back and give us a 3D digital image of what the water contour of the bottom looks like, and then calculate how much water is effectively available in the pond. We're also looking at the possibility of being able to put remote sensing on those boats. So those large impoundments, what can happen sometimes, because they're 12, 15 foot deep, is you can get layers of stagnation in those, particularly if your aeration's not in effect. So my goal on this is to be able to have a sensor that will measure like dissolved oxygen or that oxidation reduction potential, and have it run around this pond at different depths and give me a 3D map of what that water quality data looks like inside that pond. But that's a remote control.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, we just set the pond.
So it's like it's like a wet drone.
Right.
So you're focused mainly on the aeration and ensuring that your pond doesn't go sour. Do you have any quantification of remaining hydrocarbons in the treated produced water that goes into those ponds? Because I'm sure that the DAF doesn't eject all of the entrained VOCs.
No, typically the water that we send out there, now what we regularly monitor is our total oil and grease content of that water. And our goal is sending water out to those impoundments that has less than 30 milligrams per liter of total oil and grease in. Because that's also.
Yeah, I'm asking about the lighter components.
We don't routinely look at DOCs in those.
Okay. I just want to comment that your statement that enclosed DAFs will only happen if regulations require it, we should put a pin in that for our discussion within the consortium and advice to ECMC. Thank you.
Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff Kirtland with Peons and Rick. Thanks for this presentation. A lot of similarities, I think, across the nation in terms of how this process works in different fields. I think your comment with respect and the questions that Irene and Barbara are asking with respect to and Carmia on the regulations and the covering of DAFs, I think is an important conversation. I'm excited here in a month when we come out to the Peons to show you some DAFs that are covered and do have emissions technology that captures and sends emissions to DECDs. So I think that practice is already in place in Colorado, at least in the Peons. So it'll be important for us to talk about that technology. But I guess with respect to the processes that you all use and thinking about just the conversations we've had, what sort of is the interaction with and the impacts with communities and because you talk about the pipelines and really I'm just trying to understand in your application getting water from a centralized location to a location for frac. What is your interaction in working with communities?
So during the course of my career, there's been a couple of different instances to talk about there. One of them is in West Texas, and what we're currently doing now. Typically, we have interactions with the landowner. That's primary with the railroad commission regarding what we're doing there, making sure we're getting a permit. We don't necessarily have to have community meetings because a lot of where we're operating is outside of an urban environment, so you're just really having to deal with the landowner and making sure that's an issue. Now, going back to my time with Chesapeake Energy, when we operated down in the Eagle, we had a group down there, us and other operators. We joined a group called the South Texas Energy and Economic Roundtable, STEER. And what that was a community outreach program. And it was a very, very well received deal. Is that STEER worked with all the local communities and all the local judges and the Analytical county commissioners and stuff like that to ensure that all their concerns were being addressed on a regular basis. And so they were a great liaison between industry and the community and did a wonderful job of doing that. And I've always pointed to that when we talk about community outreach, that was a great example of how that can be done effectively using local third-party individuals instead of having an outside industry representative come in and tell you this. Hey, this is why this is good for you.
Thanks for that, Rick. I appreciate that.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for the presentation and answering all the questions. And I thought it was great. I really appreciate the fact that you had a disclaimer at the beginning of your presentation. I sometimes think AAG Davenport should create one of those for me before I say anything at any of the meetings that I'm at. But thanks again. I know that it's noon. We just have a couple other things here we need to do today. If folks can stick around, that'd be great. I do think Angelique is with us, and I think she's interested in providing her 3 minutes of public comment. She's also provided written public comment that has been distributed to everyone, and so we can have Angelique provide her 3 minutes of public comment, and then Dr. Aaron Sidlako is going to provide an update on deliverable 9. Do we have Angelique with us?
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Angelique. Go ahead and start.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the meeting today. It was a lot of good information. And I think it's really, I appreciate being last or part of the last part, that I think it's a really beautiful tie-in, just the conversation that has been happening regarding deliverable 9 and looking at microremediation. And I appreciate those these new ways being considered and just being in the question. And so hearing a lot of the conversation today about the distilled RO water, one of the features about RO water, I would just like to share, in that state, it strips the water of everything. So whatever it hits into next, it's going to leach its minerals out to find an equilibrium and homeostasis. So that's something that absolutely needs to be considered in these filtration processes when we're, if we're looking at RO and distillation, those are features that are a remnant of that particular type of filtration. And then also, my apologies, I missed a little bit of the meeting. I had to take a call, but I wanted to just pin that the disproportionate effects, although the maps are fantastic and all, we have seen demonstration that the industry is looking to do temporary facilities. So I'd like to, I'd be interested to hear what Rick would like to say, or, how they're securing the communities in these temporary facilities that they're putting in and proposing as they move into areas that don't have the adequate space for these larger facilities. And also speaking to Commissioner Pinter's comments and some of the things that were said about the enclosures and modern facilities, I think that just leans to the conversation of microremediation in those storage tanks. And Rick, I appreciate your openness of just, what's possible in this next iteration and really looking at opening this up for Colorado to hold the space for these pilots, for some of these pilots of working specifically with mycology in the fungi kingdom to support us to have healthier soils and waters as this process goes through. And speaking to Commissioner Pinter's, just leaving it to Weld County for the disposal. Farmer Highline Canal, which is a known toxic waste site since the 60s, is now being relined with that soil that is a waste site, and that is the drinking water for North Glen, Westminster, and Thornton. So that is an issue when we look at these toxic things in our waters. Really, the solutions are all over us. There's opportunity for us to bring these things forward because it's affecting our communities already, and things are moving forward that are jeopardizing our waters. And in Weld County, if that's where we're shipping our water, then in the draft, it talks about how that's where they put it into an aquifer, which I'm not sure how that was able to happen without these things being put in place already. But it's a paper quoted in this draft. So, that's apparently what's happening to our waste from Adams County. And I think that's very concerning. And we need to look at downstream and how we're being, and are we coming as a good relative? So I'd like to continue the conversations about those storage tanks, that are above ground. As Rick was mentioning, what is possible in putting the mycelium embedded into those containers so we can start the remediation immediately in these new ways that can nullify or really minimize the toxicology components of them. I thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comments and your perspective. Always appreciated. With that, I'll hand it over to Assistant Director for Research and Sidlaco to wrap up with the last item on the agenda.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I know we're a little over time, so I'll try to be quick. But we learned so much this morning, and a big thank you to all our speakers. It was great. I'll try to be quick. It's just an update. Thank you all for your engagement with this draft. It's coming along. Emma, next slide, please. It's just a quick reminder of why we're here. House Bill 23-1242 gives us that clear directive. By July 1st, we need to evaluate analytical and toxicological methods used to assess produced water, especially when considering its use outside the oil field. This is all part of that literature review that is deliverable 9. We shared our first draft at the March 14th meeting, and we're on pretty good track to review the final draft together for June 6th. Next slide, Emma. Here is where we stand in the process. That second draft of our report is now ready and available for your review. The version reflects the many thoughtful comments and conversations we've had following the first draft, and I truly appreciate the time and effort from everyone involved. The second draft was sent out to all of you on May 2nd, and we're currently in the review and comment period, which runs through May 16th. So please continue to share your feedback. After this second review, I'll compile the changes and incorporate them into a final draft, which should be back out to you by May 23rd. And then we'll meet again on June 6th in Rifle to finalize that report and submit the completed version by the July 1st deadline. Thanks, Emma. With most of you, I've directly responded and discussed your comments, but there's a few major changes in the second draft that I've summarized here. We've fleshed out the section on key findings, pulling together the latest research and highlighting where more work is needed. And in response to your feedback, there's a deeper dive into both regulated contaminants and those that remain unknown with an expanded discussion on standards. You'll also notice that we have some placeholders in the report. So that's where we are still planning to incorporate additional content related to public comments and other comments. We've also expanded our coverage of non-targeted analysis techniques, and Table 3 now offers more detail and clarity on the different categories of water constituents. The methods and assessments approaches are described a bit more clearly, and the evaluation tools section has been reorganized to make it flow easier with more practical examples in there too. We've touched on the potential reuse scenarios and included more guidance on regulatory considerations. And finally, we expanded the case studies to highlight more actionable outcomes and lessons learned from those, so we can all better understand what's working and where there's room for improvement. So, thank you again for your engagement. It's been really critical to making this deliverable stronger and more relevant. So please continue to engage with me. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate the update. More to come at the June meeting where we'll have a discussion about that particular topic. Oh, sorry, Trisha, I didn't see you there. You had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and great work, Aaron. That's a lot to pull together. I was just curious, something Aaron and I have been talking about is deliverable number 9. Would it make sense to make it more Colorado specific? It's got a lot of broad and talking about other basins, and if we made it more specific, it could be used as a tool to inform, state specific regulations that exist, or we could identify where regs or guidance is needed related to potential, reuse outside the oil field. For example, like firefighting, that gets sprayed across a watershed. Are there state requirements for water quality standards or something, and what are the methods you need to use? And those are some of the things Aaron and I have talked about as far as how deliverable number 9 looks and how it could be a useful tool. And so I was just kind of curious what other people's thoughts are, because there's just so much stuff in there that it feels like it almost is kind of diluting the purpose. At least that's that for me. So just throwing that out there.
So if I can respond a bit, when we had talked about this deliverable at the beginning, we talked about it being sort of that baseline of information before we really consider Colorado specific solutions or questions. In my mind, that's kind of that task here, is to have the baseline and background information so that we can then use this information to start talking about Colorado specific ideas. But that's my 2 cents. It's everybody's report.
Barbara?
I was just going to comment. I think it's really good to have this very comprehensive set of background information informing us before we go to Colorado specific. I think I understand what Trish is saying. Let's make it as useful as possible for recommendations to our regulatory agencies. But on the other hand, there are places that have learned a lot more than we have experientially about produced water. And I think Rick's presentation underscores that. So thank you.
Carmia?
My question is clarifying, I guess, the opportunities for review. So it sounds like between now and the 16th, comments are welcome, but yet we will be discussing the final version at our in-person meeting on June 6th. So is that an opportunity to provide further review and comment? Or is that just solidifying any last minute questions that Aaron and folks might have?
Thank you, Carmia. My hope is that we can flesh out any big items before, like during this review by the 16th. And then I will incorporate all of those changes into a final draft that I'll send to you by the 23rd. So then you'll have another 2 weeks to kind of look at that before we talk about it again in June.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think if you have big picture like thoughts or comments, now's a great time to present those as much as possible. But ultimately, we're still all going to have to have a discussion at the meeting and refine it. But it's getting close to when we have to submit it in July 1st, and we're kind of moving down that process now. So sooner the better for any kind of big picture stuff that you want modified or adjusted or considered. So and then Tricia, to your point as well, I hear you, and I do think it's really important to have that more Colorado specific focus. But I do think that at least I kind of envision this as a multi-step deliverable, understanding what the
Okay.
deliverable was legislatively, but kind of taking a broad swath first and then refining that based on the findings from the broad swath on things that would be most applicable to Colorado specific policy or research or pilot projects or whatever that kind of broad swath tells us should be the next step, right?
Yeah, I guess am I on mute now? I guess my thinking is, yeah, I think the big picture, other stuff that's happening in other states is important, but maybe put that as appendices, but make the report dialed in to Colorado so that it's useful for policymakers. You know, just a suggestion.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm not saying lose the information. I guess maybe I'm saying reformat how it's presented in the report. The report be very Colorado specific. If you're going to discharge to surface waters, you need to use Clean Water Act methods. These are the treatment technologies that can remove the constituents of concern. So it's very dialed in and an easy tool to use, and put the other materials maybe in appendices and reference it. Just a suggestion.
Okay. Irene?
Hi, yes, thank you, Irene Anderson. Thanks for putting this together. It's really great, Aaron. The letter that came in from QB Energy from, I don't know how to pronounce it, is Christine Maispansky. In her second bullet, she mentions that with a lot of these treatments, they're extremely energy intensive and expensive. And it would be very helpful, I think, if on the different treatments, if information regarding their energy intensivity and their expense were included. Thank you.
Right. Well, thanks for the thoughts, and I'm sure that Erin's interested in continuing to hear your thoughts offline between now and May 16th, and so continue to share your thoughts with her. I do want to be cognizant of folks' time. I know we're 15 minutes past, and so Hope, unless you've got anything else, am I forgetting anything?
Really great presentations. Thank you all.
Yeah, I really want to make sure that everyone who presented today knows, how important that information that you're sharing with us is to our conversation, and really appreciate your willingness to put yourself out there and share that information with us. And thanks for a great meeting today. Really looking forward to seeing everyone next month in person, out on the Western Slope, which is a great place to be that time of year. And thank you, Jeff, uh, and Commissioner Overton for helping coordinate the meeting on the Western Slope. And yeah, with that, I think the meeting today is closed. Everyone enjoy the weekend, and we'll see everyone next month. So thanks much.
Enjoy your puppy.